I don't even know where to start here. If you've managed to intercept this, then odds are that you're in for a bad time. If you're one of the ones back home who got me into this mess, then I hope you rot. Either way, I'm trying to send this out to as many people as possible. At the very least, you deserve a little warning of what's to come. From the top, my name is Pierce Valens. For the past 7 years now, I believe, I've honestly lost track of time. Anyway, I've been stationed on the moon. I'm a geologist called up here to help with a mining operation after some unknown minerals were found. Unfortunately, I'm the last person alive up here now, and I don't see that lasting too much longer. So consider this my last will and testament. I ain't getting out of here, and there's no way that the rod is getting out of here either. And guess if I have any solace, it's that the bigwigs who were up here bit it first. Okay, none of this is going to make sense unless we start from the beginning. The big thing you need to know is that the space race ended and became more of a space marathon. It wasn't about who finished first. It was about getting there and setting up your territory to see what you could find. The states ended up working together with other countries. China, the former Soviets, India. Basically anybody who could pop a rocket into orbit got an invitation. Hooray, world unity, right? Now when it comes to this, everyone is up here working together, but they're about to end the entirety of humanity through their combined efforts. All their resources went into building a nice little outpost up here on the moon, though I'm not sure what the original purpose of it was. Eventually, probably around, 6 years or so ago from the briefing that I got, they started mining. Initially, it started out as just a, let's find out what's under the surface type of thing. Innocent enough, right? Find some rare minerals and maybe change how things operate on Earth. Except the mining is what got us into this stupid situation. About 3 years ago was when they found the Great Table. That's the technical term for it anyway. Apparently it was during one of the regular mining operations. Workers tunneling under the surface of the moon. Seems like a fantastic idea, right? Well, they ended up breaking through into this huge hollow antechamber. A big discovery, right? Turns out, Hollow Moon was the least of our conspiracy-addled worries. This place was big, located pretty close to the center of the satellite, but it didn't match up. The dimensions of the place made no sense when compared to our measurements of the moon itself. When placed in comparison to the surface area, our tunnels and everything else, it's like it took up far more room than was physically possible. Yet nothing was different if you were looking down from the surface. That threw everybody for one heck of a loop, naturally. I was already here for geological surveys, testing out samples that some of the excavation crew brought back, and seeing what they compared to back on Earth. Nothing too crazy, and the pay was good at the start, especially for how easy the work was. Most of the materials found up here were just different forms of basalt, silicon, the occasional deposit of iron, all stuff that we've seen before. I can still remember watching the live feed when they found the chamber. We had excavated down probably 300 miles below the surface of Earth's lunar body. As far as what they were trying to find, I don't know. Maybe they were hoping for water or some new energy source. Instead, we found a vast, empty cavern that steadily kept sloping downward. I honestly was surprised that we didn't hit the top of it and fall through. Instead, crashing through almost perfectly perpendicular to the floor of it. They set up an elevator to get more of us down there before long, and let me tell you, just stepping into that cavern almost broke my brain. You see, one thing the moon has going for it is the lack of light pollution. Set up at the right spot on the base and you could see stars you never thought existed. Entire galaxies were visible far off, almost to the naked eye if you looked hard enough. One of the most beautiful sights that I've ever seen, and you could catch it from almost anywhere on the surface. In here though, complete darkness. It was a void even with our strongest lights set up. Couldn't see the top of the place, no ceiling above, just the dark absence of anything. It was the first time that I had seen complete darkness in a while, and something about it was just primal. Everything in me told me to run the moment that I stepped down there. We eventually set up a full base camp and started exploring the chamber. We never found an end to it. The entire thing just stretched on forever, even after we had estimated 600 miles covered. There's no way that we wouldn't find some end around there with the dimensions of the moon. I fully expected to come across a massive cavern wall at any point, ready to crack through to the surface on the other side, or at least into something. But no, we just kept moving, until we found the Great Table. I wasn't on the mission that found the first bit of rot. I did see that team when they got brought back through our base camp though. The videos they had. God, it was like a bad movie. The pale lights of their suits were lighting solid rock in every direction, the darkness beyond encroaching like it was trying to take the team. Eventually though, the color of the rock changed. It was so gradual that you would hardly notice it at first, just the lightest hint of dark creeping into the gray rock. Eventually though, it started clustering, darkening the gray to a dark charcoal color. And eventually it took over so fully, such a dark black, that it mixed into the abyss around them, making ground near indistinguishable from the void. Even with a more high-powered light, it still looked like the team was just floating in space, likely to fall into the ground at any moment. Every so often there would be a crack in the floor, a deep green breaking through the black. I can't really blame the team for being hesitant to check it, but eventually one of them noticed that the cracks were pulsating. One finally suggested that he believed it was glowing, and that was where the first mistake was made. The 5 members of the team gathered close, each putting a hand on another before turning off their lights, one by one down the line. As the darkness began closing in with each one deigniting, the green glow of the cracks became more defined. They were indeed pulsating, the green ebbing and flowing from one direction as it went in waves. The team took a moment to orient themselves, keeping their lights off while turning to face the direction the pulse was originating from. The last one in line tripped in the shuffle, losing his hand on the one in front of him. There was a brief shout, terror filling his voice, and then it was gone. His camera feed blinked out with a small burst of glitched pixels. The rest of the team turned their lights on immediately, shouting for him to do the same and stay close. Their cameras panned in every direction, desperately searching for their friend there just moments before. But there was nothing, just the cracks still pulsating a faint green against their pale lights. The 5th member of their party was gone, nowhere in sight. The fear in their faces as the suit cams kept shaking, everyone desperately turning to try and find their teammate. It's something that I've never been able to shake. That was 4 years ago now, and looking back, that was our sign to get the heck out of there. The team followed their line back after a while, making it back to base camp after a couple of days. None of them were normal though. Everyone began to steadily decline, their health beginning to crash out, starting with intense bouts of insomnia. By the time they were brought back through my segment of the base, it was like seeing corpses get walked through. They couldn't be taken out of their suits at this point due to how frail they were, worrying that they could break a limb in the process of getting them out or back in for transport. They were just wasting away in there. By the time they got back to the surface, they were practically soup in there, so decomposed their bodies just melted within hours. I don't know if it was the quick rise back to the surface, maybe a change in atmospheric pressure, I don't know. but the reports that we got back were that they had to just dispose of the suits themselves, because they were dead and gone. Unfortunately, however, they disposed of the suit, and it wasn't enough. Despite the rotting corpses sloshing around inside the atmospheric suits, God, it makes me gag just thinking about it. The footage that we got up from here a couple of days later was something even more disturbing than the fear that I had seen in their faces just days before. They sent us these security tapes. I guess that in absence of any real idea of what to do with their festering bodies in those suits, they were just put in a cold storage in hopes of, I don't know, stalling any further putrefaction. They were in a deep freezer that was serving as a makeshift morgue, suits still on and the gases inside causing them to stay rigid and nearly laying on the tables. God, the poor guy that had to move them, Through the cameras, you could see little droplets on the visors of the suits from what they were now. Anyways, it was maybe 12 hours, not that long after they were put in there. One of the four just gets up, starts walking around like not a thing happened. The other three followed not long after, suits getting up and walking around the small cold storage area. Eventually they started banging on the door and I swear that we could hear screams over the recording, begging to be let out, wailing in pain and misery. The first guy that answered their cries, well, he might have been the luckiest of us. Soon as the door opened, he was grabbed, one suit to each of his limbs, and they just pulled. Kept pulling even after he came apart. Another guard came in once he had heard those screams, started shooting at the whole group of them. When it busted through the suits, it was like they deflated. Only a decaying skeleton and dissolved flesh left inside. I don't know if maybe their souls couldn't escape the suits. I honestly don't know. Maybe the pressure release just made it harder for them to move with the suits on. I don't know, I'm just a guy who studies rocks. They didn't move much more after that, though not for lack of trying. Just couldn't get far in their incredibly messed up state. The guy that they tore apart was dead though, dead for real, and good for him. For some messed up reason, they kept sending people to explore the cavern even after all that. A sunk cost fallacy, I guess. Might as well keep exploring when you've already put this much money into it. Lo and behold, we find the great table a few miles further than where they left. The epicenter of those cracks, the pulsating light, it was huge. This massive slab of rock in the middle of nothing. That same dark black as the surrounding stone, so dark that one of our guys ran into it. For a moment they thought it was a wall, but eventually realized that they could go around it. All told, it took maybe half a day to circumnavigate the entire thing, and we're not entirely sure how tall it was. The cracks ended underneath it though, the pulsating green much more intense here than before. Every wave of light through it made it look like the table was breathing. Look, I want to preface all of this with, I don't know who's handing down orders for all that we're doing up here. They gave the direction though, and we had no choice but to follow. A camp was set up next to the great table, and they tried to take a sample of the rock that it was made of. Except they couldn't. Nothing could cut through it, even the most advanced mining tools that we brought up here. I mean, they used everything, drills, diamond saws, plasma. Nothing could even get a scratch on the thing. Eventually, somebody tried to examine it right then and there, but it was just too much to get any kind of reading on it. Nothing that we had on Earth or the moon so far lined up with whatever this element was. We spent months working on it, with the team by the table doing what they could to gather a sample. At some point about 1.5 years ago, whoever was up top sent down the order to try a controlled demolition. They set up about 2 miles away from the main table camp, setting up concussive charges to break through the base. Look, we all had our concerns that we voiced. They fell on deaf ears though, nobody hearing our cries for some kind of, I don't know, patience. some sort of sense when it came to busting through this unknown rock with explosives. Instead, we were told that if the crew at the table didn't do it, they would be replaced with somebody that would. The rest of us were told that we were equally replaceable, and unfortunately that was that. I remember watching the live feed when they broke through. All of us gathered around to see if this would either be completely useless or the start of our demise. Everyone knew, I think, that what we were doing was going to be nothing but bad for us. And guess somebody had profit on the line though, so it was either we go along with it or go back home with nothing in hand. Most of us chose to keep our livelihood at the time. Anyway, a few controlled explosives were put in at the base of the great table. Everyone cleared out to make room for the blast, and off it went. When the smoke had finally cleared, all it had made was the smallest crack in the center, right where it connected to the ground. The crack made its way up the wall of the great table, jagged and thin and just a hairline fracture practically. Through it, though, was that same faint green glow. Where the table met the floor of the cavern also began to crack, spreading right along the corner and separating from the rock floor. We broke the table open only a hair, and that was enough. The crew who stepped toward the crack to inspect it, we still don't really know what happened to them. From the brief seconds that we caught on camera, it looked like they were sucked through, suits folding in on themselves with the people still inside as they were being absorbed into the cracks. They barely had time to scream, basically being compressed into nothingness the moment that they stepped close to the thing. It was like a black hole contained to the 5-foot radius of the table. We weren't able to see what was on the other side either, suits getting their cameras crushed right along with their inhabitants. Needless to say, they didn't send anybody else too close after that. Not that it really mattered, because things started to go on a steady decline from there. The rot had started to take over. Slowly at first, corruption spreading from the cracks at the great table. The physical signs of it were relatively subtle the closer that you are to the table, but the mental toll that it takes. People close to the base camp started breaking down, changing mentally and physically. Their bodies atrophied, sometimes in days and sometimes weeks, and their minds started to go right along with their bodies. Long losses of memory, rambling, and sudden violent outbursts. There wasn't any kind of real pattern to how people got sick. It seemingly picked and chose at random, settling in with relative subtlety in the beginning. The first signs of rot were degradation of appetite, loss of sleep, and a general irritability. That started things on the course for chaos already, leading to plenty of workers assigned to the great table camp to develop resentment and paranoia of their fellows. By the time that they began exhibiting physical signs, they were often delusional and violent, with an incredible disregard for the safety of themselves and others. Isolated incidents of violence and attacks became more frequent as more advanced in their infection of rot. As their mental state digressed, most would turn to attacking their fellow workers, believing that it would slow their decay. Whether that was true or not is a whole other issue, but they seemed to believe that the more gruesome the kill, the more that it would save them from the hell that they were experiencing. The bodies began to stack up, and gruesomely too. They would practically slice up others and turn them into makeshift altars to some deity. That's actually how we ended up with the name Rot, believe it or not. Many of them would whisper about feeding the rot as some sort of appeasement to it, and giving it a non-resistant body to begin decaying further. They tended to only attack those that were healthier, in turn, so things only began to devolve faster. Starting out, they were able to restrain the few that were in this advanced state of rot, but eventually these sick outnumbered the healthy, or those still living at least. And keep in mind that I'm not an expert in how all of this went down near the Great Table Camp, because most of this was just received through survivor reports when they made it to the nearby camps. They sent word back through and it was pretty much over then and there. All of us collectively put in our resignation storming back to the main outpost above and demanding to be sent home before this went any further. Maybe that was our own stupid thinking looking back, but we should have known that we weren't getting out of here. They stopped any kind of transport immediately. Nobody in, nobody out, and they locked us all down. For a few days, we forgot all about the chaos below the surface as things went to hell up top. Everyone rebelling and turning to violence in light of their likely impending death. Some people lost it. Others managed to pull their stuff together. Either way, none of us had very long. I ended up going back to the surface. Camps down below, well, they were bad. Most of them fell to infighting within a couple of weeks. Those that didn't to tend with the rot as it spread further from the great table. The dark black color of the rock crept further and further out from it. A message that we had received from the nearest camp to the great table said that it reached them about a week after all things went bad. 6 months passed and the entire chamber was a dark, rotting black rock, all the way to the elevator shaft that I was originally stationed at. Needless to say, the lift was shut down, so it's a good thing that I had already moved up, though it feels like I was just delaying the inevitable at that point. The real problems began not long after everybody fled to the surface. We shut off the lift and basically made our little security force up top that were constantly on watch for any of the rot, or those corrupted with it trying to make their way up. I got put on the mind-numbing job of watching camera monitors. Honestly, seeing the monitor room for the first time, it made me feel like we were being experimented on, observed. Cameras were everywhere up here and down below, capturing every small movement that we made. Not sure who was this invested in watching them all before I came along, but for me it became watching our death slowly make its way to us. Everywhere down there was taken at this point. The cracks had spread further, trailing along with the darkness that set into the rock from the great table. As they spread, though, it was like the light in them became brighter, more powerful as it corrupted more and more of the planet. Those poor idiots that remained down there. Well, the ones that were living didn't stay that way for now. The rot was corrupting people at a much faster rate, the further that they were from the great table. It's like the symptoms were dialed up to 11 as distance grew from the initial cracks, leading to a more spontaneous burst in violence before rotting away, trapped as muscles atrophied and left decaying corpses behind. Some were collapsed around the chamber, still in Atmos suits as they desperately tried to find some other form of shelter before they were taken. Others were in the pop-up habitats that we had scattered through the camps down there, right in full 4K glory on the cameras, rotting away as their brains remained fully aware of what happened around them. Some didn't get the mental psychosis. I think that was the worst part to see. There was no hint of violence, malice, or anything when they spoke, but you could see their bodies beginning to break down. I watched one poor man overnight begin to go downhill, said that his muscles ached, his head hurt as well, and when he tried to stand up, his bones were so brittle that his legs simply broke. He was stranded there as the rest of him biologically degraded over the next few hours, a waxy look creeping into his face before his skin began flaking off, revealing a skull with eyeballs beginning to sag from it. I made it a point to start flipping away from his camera when it came up in the rotation because he ended up staring straight into me, almost right through the camera and into my soul. It still gives me shivers when I think about it, even after he moved later on. I watched the cracks reach all the way to the lift before they stopped spreading completely. We honestly thought that we were saved. The cracks weren't an issue anymore. We had a couple of months where we even started deluding ourselves into thinking that we might get out of here. A couple of the guys had been sending radio signals back to Earth, trying to get in contact with somebody who could tell people about us. We were finally getting through to someone that was taking us seriously, but that was all for nothing, I guess. The bloom began to take hold a few months ago. I wasn't sure if I was actually seeing reality at first, or if I was finally losing my mind. I figured the stress of everything finally caught up, or worse, that the rot might finally have found a way up there to take me out. It took me a few minutes to reconcile that I wasn't just losing my mind up here. I was going through the cameras one day, just going monitor by monitor, flipping through whatever feeds were still coming from down there. And everything changed. It was that same atrophied man, the one that broke his legs trying to get up and was forced to sit there, feeling his body decay around him. The skeleton was partially broken down by this point, part of a decaying eye still dangling from the socket, as whatever internal organs he had left continued to rot away inside him. I had noticed there was a point of slower decay, usually after the skin had sloughed off, and they just remained there as putrid frames, skeletal forms barely holding the remaining organs in as they rotted. I think it was so odd that it just didn't compute at first, but right behind that dangling eyeball was a blooming and bright blue flower. I don't know how long I stared at it, only to flip away and flip right back, convinced that it was just me losing my mind. But no, I started noticing it in other areas too as I flipped through monitors. There were flowers blooming, deep beneath the surface of Earth's moon. Green light pulsing through the cracks in the floor around them, as they blossomed into beautiful colors on all the rotting corpses. Those closest to the great table were the first to undergo the full process. Before long, their bodies were covered. An entire bouquet of blues, yellows, reds, pinks, greens, purples. So many beautiful and vivid colors that I've never heard a name for, bursting forth on these decayed horror mannequins. A breathtaking sight. The vines of the flowers blooming on them would wind their way around their skeletal remains, covering bone and making them into whole new beings. And then they started to move again. Slow at first, like they were just learning to propel themselves. But before long, the dead began to get up and walk once more. At the great table, even those that had been murdered and offered up as sacrifices to the rot began to be overcome by the bloom, leading to a whole second life as vine overtook rotten veins and muscles, moving them like puppets, all toward us. Their numbers grew with those further from the great table blooming in turn at a more rapid rate, before joining the horde of floral zombies moving ever closer to the left. I alerted the others as soon as the bloom had started, so everyone was aware of what was happening. There were probably only 30 of us left, with more than 100 down below making their way toward us for a reason that we have yet to know. One of our guys dropped the lift before they were able to reach it, cutting the cables so that there was no way for them to bring it back up. On one monitor, I watched the crash, flames briefly coming through before they were snuffed out by the lack of atmosphere. I honestly wonder if that only gave them a more precise idea of where we were. The cracks in the ground had spread all the way there already, and the green light pulsated from them in the monitors, illuminating the field of rotten flowers as they moved ever closer to the last barrier between us and them. It did no good. They broke right through, inhuman strength pulling the shaft open despite the lift wreckage in the way. I don't have any cameras inside the lift, so I don't know how they did it, but they climbed up through mile after mile like it was nothing. And before we knew it up here, flowers were blooming right through the cracks in the door on the left. Swear that this was what it felt like to see the last march of the Ents from the opposing side, knowing that you were about to get murdered by a plant. I locked myself off in the monitor room. I know it sounds cowardly, but what the heck was my choice otherwise? I would have let anybody in if they asked and were still alive, but well, it didn't take very long for things to go bad. I had a front row view for the carnage, and it just, well, it was bad. The bloom-filled corpses stormed in through the lift gates, overpowering it and leaving an entirely new ecosystem in their wake. Some of the guys tried to fight them off, some using fire to try and take them down, others resorting to weapons that they cobbled together. It was no use. The moment that a bloom saw somebody that wasn't infected yet, they would grab them, no escape possible. I saw one guy who got caught right outside of the main gates get picked up by 3 of the bloomed, each one stabbing into him with thick green vines. From there, it's like they didn't drain them. It was more like they cultivated the bodies that they picked up. Maybe the vines transferred seeds or spores or something, but the poor guys on the receiving end got the unfortunate privilege of skipping the rot phase entirely. They didn't even have the vines out of that first guy when the blooms started taking him over. I don't know if it's different because the bodies are more fresh, maybe more nutrients to pull from. Who knows, to be honest. In his case, though, the flowers were larger and more ravenous than the ones on the previous rot victims. They were still vivid colors, but the flowers themselves sprouted larger, almost overtaking portions of the poor guy's body completely as they bloomed outward. The guy fell to the ground, twitching for only a moment before getting up and making his way toward former allies, the huge blossoms now erupting from his body and devouring those that he could get a hold of. I always loved Monet paintings, and this, one of the flowers blooming on this guy, reminded me of a water lily. Huge petals all blossoming out from the center. Floating on a pond, they would have been magnificent, but here I saw them quickly become drenched in blood as they tore into other humans, the petal edges shredding anything they came into contact with. Before long, blood was flying everywhere as the bloom overtook even more healthy humans, all being propagated one by one as these zombies made their way forward. As the droplets of crimson covered the petals, though, they were just as quickly drank by the flora, seemingly driving it toward more. All I could really do was hide here in the monitor room. There was no hope for anything out there. The monitors told me the entire story of what I had waiting for me. The bloom from down below, well, they started spreading through the main base up here, the rot and corruption following them as they went. I saw darkness spread through the white plastic and steel that we used as building materials in the base, slowly creeping up from the lift shaft. It felt like an entirety that I'd been in here, trying not to make any noise or call attention to myself, unless some of the bloomed end up finding me. The rot is going to reach me first at this rate, though. Everything is turning black, slowly breaking down in decay as it goes. I can see rust growing on some of the exposed steel in spots around the base. High-quality cameras keeping me hyper-aware of just how screwed I am. No matter what it comes up against, organic or not, this decay just spreads, corrupting anything it comes into contact with. The first crack appeared up here yesterday, right in the transport hall leading to the lift gate, where there was still dark blood staining the blackened walls from only days ago when the bloom had broke in. The pulsing green light was visible in the elevator shaft before it even got up here, an ominous glow cutting through the corrupted darkness. I swear that it's breathing, pulsing, feeling for any life out there that it can still take root in. Me. I'm running out of food in here. I know that I'm the last living person on the moon too. Watching these monitors, I got to see everybody meet their demise. The last holdout was a guy named Apollo, a good guy who worked in the cafeteria and made some of the best adobo chicken that I had ever had in my life. I don't know if he forgot about them or what, but I saw him running from the bloom a few days ago, desperately trying to live despite all odds. He found the cold storage room, the same one where the initial rot victims had been kept, and tore apart another guy. Guess he didn't remember that after everything else that happened though, because the moment he opened that door, he was done for. 4 Atmos suits all bursting with flowers and greenery like a mobile terrarium took him immediately. Vines forced their way through his skin, along his back and his stomach, one going down his throat despite his attempts to fight back, and began to bloom immediately. He was a shade of purple that popped against the dark rot infecting the base, beautiful in the decay. So here I am, all alone orbiting the Earth, with something that would easily destroy the world slowly making its way toward me. The green cracks are spreading further in, and even though I know I'm alone, I swear that I can hear people calling me. Whatever it is, it knows my name too. It's all I can hear when I close my eyes. There are whispers in my ears telling me to open the door. Not like it's stopping the rot from coming through anyway. All this talking has worn me out. I'm going to try to get some sleep, hopefully without any of those flowery terrors coming in after me. I don't know how long I was asleep for. The rot is outside though, slowly seeping its way through the cracks in the door. There's this bad feeling that I've got, telling me that the moment it spreads far enough to touch where I am, everything is going to know about me. I'm terrified that all of them are going to come for me, tearing me apart and planting those seeds or whatever they are in me. This is going to sound suicidal because it definitely is. I guess I feel some sense of duty though, being the last one alive up here and all. There are people back on Earth living their lives down below, unaware of anything going on here. The rot, the bloom, all of this coming from under the Great Table. They never need to find out about it down there. Now I've made up my mind. Command is down the hallway to my left, maybe a 70-meter dash if I have a clear shot. I don't know if there is a self-destruct button in there, but I do know that there are direct controls for the ventilation and heating system. My plan is going to involve turning that on, closing off the oxygen scrubber system, and setting it to circulate the existing air in here and nothing else. And then I'm going to the shop. There should be a direct access to it from under the command room, and it takes up most of the lower floor of the base before getting down into the lift area. I'm lighting up every flammable material that I find in here and turning every nozzle wide open. The floor a few feet away from me is becoming dark, the corruption and rot getting even closer. That same whisper kept calling my name even louder now. A scream rings out from down the hallway, making me shrink back into my chair. No putting it off. I got up and ran, bursting through the door and into the hallway with abandon. I could already hear something scraping across the floor from the opposite direction that I was running, and another guttural scream burst through the still air as I ran. Command is in sight down the hallway, I just have to push a little bit harder. A bloom burst through the wall ahead, arms flailing as it came barreling toward me, arms reaching wide as it ran. I made the best effort I could, squeezing against the wall and sliding under its arms, but one of the petals still sliced my shoulder. Oh God, it hurts. I could never tell over the monitors, but up close, these petals have thousands of small spines on them, so fine that they were practically invisible. They stuck in the wound, stinging me further even after it had sliced through. I flipped myself into the command door just as the thing began to turn back toward me, slamming the heavy steel in its face and hitting the pneumatic lock. That would buy me a second. I practically fell on the desk, just trying to get on the computer. Blood was already soaking through my clothes below the wound, dripping down my sleeve onto my arm. I feel woozy, but I can't just stop now. Okay, check the computer. There. Vent controls were one of the first things under the maintenance menu, thank God. I didn't quite think it through though. Of course, there was no way to disconnect from the oxygen scrubber. God, was that rot messing with my brain? Okay, plan B. Got it. There's an option to set the oxygen levels of the air inside the base, just in case anybody needed help adjusting to the atmosphere, I guess. Normally, we sit around Earth levels, a solid 20 to 25% oxygen in the atmosphere blowing through here. How high will this thing let me take it? Holy crap, I can up the oxygen levels to 50%. 75 if I can get the emergency override code. Maybe, just maybe. My God, it's my lucky day. Humanity's lucky day even. The override code was scrawled on a sticky note sitting right there on the desk. The bloom was still outside, banging on the door trying to get through. I set the levels, hearing the ventilation kick in as soon as I started turning it up. Oxygen is incredibly flammable, so just a little time and an accelerant and we should be good to go. A vine burst through the door, stretching far into the room before it stopped, and began feeling around to try and find me. Time to get out of here. God, my shoulder hurts though. I really shouldn't have just looked at it either. There were small flowers beginning to bloom in the wound, where the little fibers from the petal were sticking. They were making their way further into my flesh, small sprouts beginning to pop up in vivid color. I felt my stomach turn. No, keep going, keep moving. I practically throw myself down the hatch, dropping in and falling onto a workbench nearby. I can see the tank pump hanging on a hook next to it. Limping my way over, I twist the nozzle, opening it wide and letting gas spray around the workshop area. This place has already been taken by the rot, darkness and mold covering the floor. Countertops thick with a layer of grime as cracks begin spreading further through. That same green pulse was already showing down here. I left the hose on the floor still sputtering out gas as it went, and I made my way over to another area. The small mechanic's bench had a welding setup nearby. Huge canisters of natural gas on hand to run the torches along with other dangerous stuff that we shouldn't be playing with. Now was the time to use it though. Nozzles wide open. These things were going to help cleanse this place in just a minute. Maybe it was the proximity to the rot or the wound that I'm suffering, but my mind is going. I can see them coming in, the bloomed corpses making their way through doors and vents to find me. The rot tells them where I am and they follow to claim me as a part of it. The flowers are beginning to blossom in my wound, petals opening wide to drink up any blood that may still come out when I move. There's a lighter on a nearby welding bench. That's it, the final piece of my explosive puzzle. I'm going to hold out another moment and let the gas finish filling out the atmosphere of the workshop. They're coming closer though. I don't know that I can move. My legs are feeling weak and painful, and even my arms are suddenly having trouble lifting just the lighter. Just another moment. As soon as the cam that I'm wearing stops recording, this message is due to broadcast out. I hope it finds someone. The bloom are starting to fall on me. I backed myself toward the gasoline puddle on the floor, falling in it nearly face first. They come upon me next and I can feel a vine puncture my back right next to my spine. The colors are beautiful though, flowers blossoming through the pain. I flick the lighter hoping for the best, before consciousness slips away forever, the rot still whispering my name. My last thought is that despite all the blood that I've lost, I'm suddenly comfortably warm, at peace. Even as the petals bloom all over my body, they are cleansed in an immediate rush of flame, purifying me to ash before the rot's decay can take me over. I wonder if those back on Earth will look up to see a beautiful garden on the moon. I pray that they see a fireball instead, and though they might not know it, they'll see their own salvation in the embers. I hope. Today's episode is sponsored by Rocket Money. A lot of people aren't aware of how much they spend each month. Do you know how many subscriptions that you pay for? What about how much you spend on takeout or delivery? I know that I definitely spend way too much on that. But there's an app designed to help you manage your money better. Rocket Money. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so that you can grow your savings. Rocket Money shows you all your expenses in one place, including subscriptions that you might have forgotten about. If you see one that you no longer want, Rocket Money will help you cancel it. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when they use all of the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/Mr. Creeps today. That's rocketmoney.com/Mr. Creeps. rocketmoney.com/Mr. Creeps. You know the conspiracy. The moon landing was faked. It was a Hollywood studio set. It wasn't even filmed live. It's all true. You might feel vindicated knowing that the televised broadcast was an elaborate ruse. However, I wouldn't smugly don that tinfoil hat. The 1969 broadcast was fabricated because the real moon landing uncovered unworldly horrors. In 1992, as a fresh-faced NASA employee, I experienced this organization's classified initiation process. I was privy to the knowledge that the iconic moon broadcast had been a hoax. I felt pity for Aldrin, Armstrong, and Collins. If the technology had been ready, they could have walked on the moon, I sighed. They deserved that mission. Nobody deserved that mission. Dr. Penny Bradshaw muttered. I ignored the scientist as she wasn't the most socially adept person. Do you know about the first tape? She continued. I sighed, realizing that the conversation could not be avoided. Huh? I asked, attempting to mask my annoyance. The first tape, Penny repeated. I don't know what you're... We went to the moon, Penny said. The Apollo lunar module went to space, but it was the Aldo module which had landed. It was the scouting module. All Claire and Smithson were the first men on the moon, and the Apollo module would have landed too, but... A second module, I scoffed, before deciding to entertain the old woman's wild story. And why wouldn't these astronauts receive the credit for landing first? Snapping back into reality, Bradshaw flashed. Oh, I shouldn't have talked about this. Forget that I said anything. Dr. Rowland told me that we never landed on the moon, I said. Why would he lie? Why would he spin an even taller tale? He could have allowed NASA employees to continue believing what the rest of the world believes. We distract you from the truth. Some things aren't worth knowing. Before the moon landing, we had no idea what we were going to find, Dr. Bradshaw explained. But there were murmurings about the unsettling frequencies, the received signals which had driven several scientists to abandon the project entirely. Many of the higher-ups didn't want us to send a manned mission to the moon, but the Russians were stubborn about pressing onwards. We had to beat them. I don't understand, Dr. Bradshaw, I said, not believing a word of her tale. People saw things, Daniel, things that they couldn't explain. The radio signals drove them insane. One man took his life, but they don't talk about that. And they don't talk about what really happened on the moon. They didn't tell us any of this, I said, and if it were true, they would tell us. She sighed. You have no idea about the things that they hide from you. Aldo 11 was a black operation. It was off the books. It ran alongside the Apollo 11 mission. It was intended to prove to NASA that Armstrong's manned mission to the moon would be safe. Right, I sighed. Ignoring me, Penny Bradshaw continued. We had a contingency to utilize a pre-recorded tape from the studio, and when Aldo 11 failed, that's exactly what we did. What are you saying? I asked. We went to the moon, but the real tape was never televised. Penny Bradshaw nodded. There were two teams, Armstrong's team and the team who saw horror beyond your wildest imagination. I was nothing more than a newly graduated boy, and I knew that hazing was common in many workplaces. But in the case of Penny Bradshaw, I knew that she didn't have a vicious side. I thought that she had simply lost the plot. She was an elderly, near-senile scientist who ended up retiring less than a year later. It was a well-known fact that Bradshaw was suffering from the early stages of dementia, but she had secured a steady position at NASA. She had status. I should have respected that. I should have respected her. But I didn't think about what she said until the Clementine mission in 1994. It was a disastrous expedition intended to observe the moon in 1620 Geographos, a near-Earth asteroid. But as was the case with many lunar missions, it ended with a devastating spacecraft malfunction. Yet with this particular failure, all I could think about was what Penny Bradshaw said. A horror beyond your wildest imagination. If that were so, why would NASA return to the moon? Perhaps I had wizened in my 2 years at the organization. Whatever the case, I found myself entertaining the idea that she had planted in my head. "Hey, Frank," I said. Frank Perez was known as the man who could get things done. Things which weren't strictly within the bounds of company policy. Things which often weren't legal beyond company policy. The IT specialist didn't even name a price for the favors. If you were a close friend, he would do just about anything off the record. He loathed NASA, though he still works for them to this day. "Daniel," he exuberantly said, throwing his arms wide. "This is a late shift for you. I was just about to head home." I embraced my friend and cut directly to the point. "I've been thinking about the moon landing." "Well, that's an interesting opener." He smirked, twirling in his creaking desk chair. "I've been thinking about the truth." "Ah, the greatest Hollywood story never told," he chuckled. "But that's not the truth, is it?" I replied. "We did go to the moon. They just didn't show what really happened." The squeaking of Frank's desk chair ceased, and he twisted to face me. "Did somebody tell you something, Daniel?" he asked. I nodded. Frank sighed. "And what makes you think that I would know anything about that? I'm just a lowly—" "Nice try. You always know everything, Frank," I interjected, grinning. He smiled. "I do like that reputation. Of course, that doesn't mean I should know the things that I know, just as you shouldn't." "Is it true?" "They double-bluffed us." Frank nodded. "Why did they tell us that they had faked the moon landing?" I asked. "Why not continue with the normal narrative? Why are they so determined to bury the truth of the astronauts who really walked on the moon first?" "They fed us a phony secret to keep our eyes off the real one," Frank answered. "It's the sort of maneuver I would expect from the conniving worms on the board, of course. But I fixed their computers, Danny, and their security is abysmal. I've seen their secrets. They may know a lot about physics, but I know more about the hardware that runs this place." "What did you see, Frank?" I asked. The man shiftily cast his gaze from left to right, ensuring that everybody in the office had gone home for the night. And then he beckoned me closer. "The real 1969 tape," he said. Though I knew nothing at that moment, the whispery tone of his voice iced my body. "What was on it?" I asked. Frank's eyes grew distant. "Death." The computer expert patted a desk chair beside me and I sat down. "I have the file, you know. I shouldn't, but I do. And I'll show you," he said, starting to type. "But the contents on that tape, they'll change you." I shivered, but my lips moved on their own volition. "Show me it," I said. Frank nodded, having already entered a prism into the Explorer's search bar. "One final thing," he paused, hovering the cursor over a file entitled 11_tape. I sighed. "Come on, Frank, it's okay, I know what. You don't know anything, and you'll know even less after seeing this. It will corrupt your dreams for nights to come," he interrupted. "After I saw the footage, I had visions, Daniel. Awful visions. I made it through the ordeal, but I don't know what happened to me. The same thing that is reported to have happened to anybody who watches it. I rolled my eyes. Come on, Frank, you watch too many films. You may be a man of science, Daniel, but in 10 minutes you won't be. There are various classified documents concerning the tape. These reports detail the thing that Auclair's team found, and even 30 years later, we still don't understand it. Nightmares, hallucinations, I'm ready, Frank. This is an opportunity to witness a pivotal point in human history, something that few people have ever seen, I said. I won't let this opportunity pass. But, Frank started. You survived it, I interrupted. I'll be fine. I'm willing to take the risk, Frank. Curiosity gets the best of me. I don't believe that a tape causes hallucinations or feverish dreams, but I certainly hope that it gives answers. He sighed. Some questions don't have answers, Daniel. Nevertheless, Frank Perez clicked on the file and the tape began to play in a small window. The video contained grainy, blurred footage of a metallic ladder leading towards a rocky, cavernous surface. This is Auclair, a man with an accent announced. Status report on the Apollo 11 module. Auclair, this is Mission Control. Apollo 11 module nears arrival. Awaiting your verdict. A staticky voice responded. Roger, Auclair replied. Taking my first step now, and the weather's looking fine. You are the first man on the moon, Commander Luis Auclair. Congratulations, the voice responded. Thank you, Control, Auclair responded. Smithson is joining me now. Second man on the moon. Smithson joyously laughed. The pair floated aimlessly for a few minutes, reveling in the truth that they were the first two men on the moon. Though nobody outside of NASA would ever know, I can only imagine the elation that they must have felt. Readings do not match those of unmanned missions, Auclair said. No radio interference. Ghost is clear. Negative. Picking up readings near the Surveyor 1 site, Commander, Smithson said, visibly hopping into the distance. Copy, Smithson. Did you copy Mission Control? Auclair asked. Copy, Auclair, the staticky voice said. Analyzing the transmission now. Unidentified radio signal confirmed. It matches the Surveyor 1 data. Conferring with primary mission controller. Wait for the go-ahead to continue. Continuing exploration, Mission Control, Auclair announced. The warped footage depicted the two-man crew bounding slowly across an ever-darkening lunar surface. Their craft had landed towards the dark side of the moon. Auclair steered the camera towards Earth for a brief moment, and a white block was visible in the distance. The official Apollo 11 module. Commander, are we clear to proceed? Smithson asked. The second in command pointed an eager-gloved finger towards a lightless opening in the face of a mountainous ridge. Auclair and Smithson, this is Mission Control. Await instruction from controller. We have not cleared you to keep. Negative, Auclair interrupted. I won't go home without seeing what's in there, sir. Smithson, we're heading into the cave. Auclair, the mission controller has. The static voice started. Return to ship, Apollo 11 crew. Another voice intermittently growled. That's an order. The second man sounded much sterner than the first, but the transmission was so choppy that he was barely intelligible. Auclair took advantage of that situation. Did not copy your last two messages, Mission Control, Auclair said, hopping ever forwards. Entering the crater. Commander Auclair and Smithson soared into the blackened mouth of the untoward cave. Dim lights fitted to their suits guided the way, but the camera's footage seemed to deteriorate with every passing second. Do you hear that? Frank asked me. I had been so immersed in the recording that I had hardly noticed my friend and I were sitting in a dark and empty office. I had truly believed myself to be on the moon with Auclair and Smithson, but I heard it. The crackling? I asked. Frank nodded. That's interference from the radio signal. What is the signal that they keep mentioning? I asked. Frank's face turned pale, but he didn't respond. He simply nodded his head at the footage of the astronauts floating through a narrow, lightless underground tunnel. Commander Auclair, do you see that? Smithson shouted. The commander gently sprang towards his friend, and the camera revealed a domed room. Oddly smooth walls enclosed the tiny space. It all looked manufactured somehow, unnatural. What is that? Auclair whispered as the two astronauts swam towards the center of the room. I realized that the light was no longer coming from the astronauts. I distinguished a translucent, glassy object in the heart of the room, a triangular prism that emitted a throbbing glow. The recording was so damaged that it was painstakingly difficult to discern the visuals or the audio, and yet something about that object was crystal clear. It was immeasurably vibrant, distinct from its surroundings. This is the source of the signal, Smithson said. I told you that we were right to land here. Excellent work, Smithson, Auclair said. Mission Control, do you copy? Auto 11 crew, do you receive this transmission? Return to your module now. The static voice repeated. Roger, we lost you for a minute there, Auclair lied. It's beautiful, isn't it, Smithson? We'll go down in history for discovering this. Could it be evidence of alien life? God, who knows? Future scholars will decide. Smithson didn't respond. Smithson, Auclair asked. The unresponsive astronaut hovered before the prism, transfixed by the inexplicable light it cast from its invisible innards. Smithson, we're going to return to the module. Do you copy? Auclair asked. They might still allow the Apollo 11 mission. We've proven that there is no danger here. I didn't used to understand, Smithson whispered, seemingly oblivious to his commander's presence. I do now. Auclair glided closer, filming the bright object. The audio interference increased in severity. Smithson, are you okay? Auclair asked. Auto 11 crew, return to your lunar module. Mission Control repeated. And then something happened which, to this day, I haven't been able to rationalize. The prism's front face reflected something that I recognized. A man standing beside Commander Auclair. My dead father. I exclaimed in horror, and the tape froze. What is this? I asked, panting heavily. But Frank, much like Smithson, didn't hear anything out of his own head. I'm so sorry, Amelia. I'm so sorry. I was staring at something beyond any scientific explanation. In a 1969 tape on the moon, I saw my father, that tall and terrifying man from my childhood, a malignant man, a man who somehow eyed me from the prism's surface, an object filmed 30 years ago on an ancient, cursed film. I had long suppressed the memory of what my father did to me, the merciless attacks, the night in which he tried to kill my mother, my 10th birthday. But as his bulky black eyes bore into my soul, that painful prism provided clarity that I had never wanted, never needed. It reminded me of what had happened that night, how I saved my mother. It revealed the knife in my hand, the blood staining the serrated edge after I had sliced his throat. I had to do it, I convinced myself, eyes swelling with fearful tears. The prism tape unfroze. Smithson, Auclair cried. Auclair's camera was no longer in his hands. It floated in the cavern, and as it slowly rotated, the angle captured Smithson repeatedly pummeling his commander's body against the rocky wall. The deranged astronaut fumbled for the clasp beneath Auclair's helmet. No, Auclair screamed, futilely resisting the stronger man. The helmet released. All Claire seized in agony for a dozen seconds before losing consciousness, and Smithson stiffly watched his friend motionlessly float before him. It sounded as if he might be crying. Was he still in there? Did he feel remorse? It was impossible to ascertain what had happened. As for All Claire's unsheltered head, the footage was thankfully too distorted to display the detailed horror of his oxygen starvation. The tape ended. The prism vanished, but on the glassy surface of Frank's monitor, barely discernible against the desktop background, the reflection of my father remained. Terrified, I tried to move. I tried to face Frank. The spectral father grew in the screen's reflection, and his face smoothed before caving inwards, transforming him into an eyeless entity. Following the clarity, there was distortion. The prism had shifted its focus, and we were slaves to its perspective. Using all of my might, I managed to snap my neck free of its paralysis, and I turned to see wide eyes on my friend's face. "It was only supposed to be a dream," he whispered breathlessly. The fluorescent light burst above our heads, and we were plunged into darkness. However, unexpectedly regaining control of our limbs, Frank and I fell from our chairs. "What did you see?" Frank panted. "My father," I whispered, "and he's disappointed," a voice hissed. I twisted my head to see my father, a man whose frame scraped the ceiling tiles. He was scarcely illuminated by the moonlight, but I could feel those eyeless sockets surveying me. "Run!" I yelled. We stumbled to our feet, and the nightmarish depiction of my father swung hopeful fingers in my direction. He caught the nape of my neck, and I cried in agony as I felt flesh peel away, buried beneath decaying nails. But I didn't stop to lick my wounds. I pushed Frank forwards, and we navigated the labyrinth of cubicles. It never seemed real to me," Frank started as we breathlessly ran towards the exit. "Keep moving," I screamed. I didn't dare look back, but I heard furnishings and office equipment crumple beneath the boundless limbs of my malformed father. The prism preyed on my darkest thoughts. It depicted Dad the way that I had always seen him as a child. Frank burst through the exit, and the light from the hallway spilled into the office. We stumbled out of the blackness, and I spun to slam the door on the abomination pursuing us. And then with bated breath, we waited for the creature to tear through the flimsy door, before undoubtedly tearing through us. But nothing came. The sound of footsteps tapered away. I pictured my father silently waiting on the other side of the door, baiting me much as he had always done during my childhood. But there was only silence. It must have been about 10 minutes later when one of us finally dared to move. The IT specialist shakily crept towards the office door. "Don't," I whispered. "Let's just leave." Frank shook his head. "We have to be sure, Daniel." The man threw the door open and he flicked on the main lights. They illuminated an empty office space. My father was gone. "She's not here," Frank whispered, wiping tears from his face. "Who?" I asked. "I saw her when I first watched the tape. Amelia. My Amelia. She was my wife," Frank explained. "I saw her in my dreams. Nightmarish hallucinations, but never anything real. Nothing that came for me. This time she was angry." "Frank, I began. "It was my fault, Daniel," Frank interrupted. "I took my eyes off the road and I didn't see the truck coming. I didn't. It should have been me who died." That was what she kept saying as we ran. "It should have been you." And she was right. She was telling the truth. "That wasn't her, Frank," I said. "I know," the man whispered. "And it wasn't your father either." "What is it, though?" I trembled. "The prism," Frank replied. "Everybody sees something different. A person's darkest moment, I said. Frank nodded. But it's never been real before, Daniel. It's never been anything like that. Look at your neck, that's no hallucination. I gingerly touched the bloody gashes behind my head, wincing as the adrenaline wore off and the pain finally came to the forefront of my senses. Why did Smithson kill Eau Claire? I groaned. I don't know why he did it, and I don't want to imagine what he saw. Frank shuddered. Afterwards, he took his own life. Immediately following the horrors which unfolded in that cavern, NASA aborted the mission. Apollo 11's lunar module returned home, and the pre-recorded tape was broadcasted on live TV. What about the prism? I asked. NASA left it up there, right? I hope so, Frank whispered. Polychoria is an extremely rare eye condition in which an iris contains two pupils. Before last weekend, I didn't even know that an eye could have double pupils. You might be in the same boat, given that there have only been 2 recorded cases of true polychoria since 1966, supposedly. Why am I telling you about this obscure type of eye defect? Well, I've been conducting research on the topic. I need to understand what happened at my great-aunt's mansion out in the sticks. I thought that finding an answer would ease the gnawing knot of terror in my chest, but no rational explanation seems to suffice. Not even the textbook definition of polychoria explained what I saw. My father's side of the family is essentially non-existent, due to some terrible childhood event that he hasn't ever discussed. Only he and his Aunt Audrey survived. We used to be visited by her when we were little, but she has grown sicker and sicker with every passing year, so last weekend we finally went on a family trip to see her. Why do we have to drive all the way to Scotland? My younger sister Lisa moaned. I don't think you'll be whining when you see it, Lisa, my dad laughed. It makes our house look like a shoebox. It's a palace. In the middle of nowhere, my little brother Jacob muttered under his breath. Inverness isn't in the middle of nowhere, my dad scoffed. It's not technically Inverness though, is it? I pointed out. I checked the destination on Google Maps. Audrey's house is a few miles from the city in a sketchy little place with no name. Oh, come on everyone, this is an adventure. You'll be eating your words in a few hours, my mom said. You won't want to go back to Bury. She wasn't wrong, but I didn't want to be in Bury or Inverness. I wanted to be with my university friends in Manchester. They were partying before resuming studies. I, meanwhile, was cooped up in a car with my irritating siblings and incessantly peppy parents. A red car, Jacob giggled. Thump. Every time that he saw a red car on the motorway, my demonic brother would punch me in the arm. I semi-patiently tolerated the moronic game. Jacob's 11-year-old attention deficit brain needed some sort of stimulation on a 6-hour car journey. The alternative would be fidgeting and complaining about the lack of signal on his phone. Besides, I had ways to entertain myself too. Did you ever hear about the little boy who spoke too much? I asked. Felicity, my mom warned, no scaring your brother. I'm not scared of Felicity's lame ghost stories, Jacob insisted. Oh, this isn't a story, I said. This is something that I saw on the news. A little boy drove his older sister to madness, but she was a medical student, so she tied him to an operating table, stitched his lips together, and for good measure removed his limbs. No, she didn't, Jacob stammered. You made that up. My brother attempted to maintain his composure, but his trembling voice gave him away. If only you had the signal to Google it on your phone, huh? I teased. Nah, you're right, I made up the part about the limbs. It makes a gal think, though. I eyed up Jacob's left arm, the weapon that he used for the red car game. I slowly stroked my chin as if I were contemplating how I would saw my brother's culpable limb given the chance. His face turned pale. Come on, Felicity, my mom said. That's enough. You scared, Mom? I asked, grinning. "Look outside the window, Felicity," Lisa said. "There's something creepier than your story." We had reached Audrey's village. All 5 of us silently soaked in the strange little ghost town. It was a time capsule, a perfectly preserved place. Rusted husks of vehicles from the 90s were rotting away on overgrown, weed-covered driveways. The main road was mostly deserted, but there were a few withered wanderers who stopped and suspiciously squinted at the family in the shiny Range Rover. We were out of place and everybody knew it. "Does anybody even live here?" Lisa asked, shuddering. "Those people look like ghosts." "A lot of folk moved away in the 90s, my dad replied. "Most of the people around here were farmers and they left when the crop fields started to dry up." "I don't like that they're all staring at us," Jacob said, disappearing into his seat. Not many people come to these parts," my dad said. "That's all." "What about your aunt?" Lisa asked. "Why is she still here?" "Old money," my mom chuckled. "Very old money," my dad added. "My family members definitely weren't farmers. I guess you weren't listening when I said a mansion." As we rounded the corner at the end of the village, my father smugly nodded his head at something ahead of him. "Take a look," he said. We squeezed our heads between the 2 front seats, eager to see what lay at the end of the half-mile stretch of road. Even at that distance, the humongous house loomed impressively above its surroundings. Woodland sat behind it and huge gates sat before it, roughly a quarter-mile from the road. It was a ridiculously long driveway. "What do you think?" my mom asked. "Speechless, are we?" "It looks like a haunted house," Jacob said. I leaned towards him and whispered, "I bet there's an operating table in the basement." As we trundled onto the gravel at the front of the house, which I had half anticipated to be abandoned, we were greeted by a dozen smartly dressed servants. I thought to myself that my great-aunt was probably the only employer left in the barren village. I kept that hypothesis to myself, of course. Once we had all bundled out of the Range Rover, my father opened the boot. A young man in a suit sprinted swiftly in front of him. "Let me get your bag, sir," the man insisted. "Mrs. Rhinestone is waiting for you in the lounge." Yep, that's our family name. Believe me when I say that I've faced plenty of ridicule for having what my friends call a bougie name. Felicity Rhinestone. My brother and my parents headed to the front door, and my sister, who was multitasking by looking at her phone and her surroundings, strode alongside me. "These members of the staff look like hostages. You think she pays them?" Lisa asked, smirking. I laughed. We're in the boonies now, who knows? The slave trade might still exist out here. We snorted under our breaths. Some of the servants collected our bags from the Range Rover, but most of them hung back. We were standing proudly on the driveway as if they were the guards of Buckingham Palace. One of them in particular caught my eye. She was a young, spectacularly pretty woman who wore her dirty blonde hair in a ponytail. Actually, she was a girl. She must have been around my age. She beamed at me and her posture seemed a little lackadaisical compared to her regimented colleagues. From the moment that I first saw her, it was clear that she didn't belong. I hardly registered all of those things, however. I noticed something else. She had 2 black pupils in her left iris. Desperately trying not to gulp, I politely smiled at the servant and hurried my sister into the house, following the rest of my family. The beautiful staff member tilted her head to one side, following us with her 3 pupils, and there was something wrong with the smile on her lips. It filled me with immense dread. I was sure to close the front door behind me so as to distance myself from the woman's eerie gaze. It had nothing to do with the double pupils in her eye, and everything to do with her haunting expression. "What was wrong with?" Lisa began. "Stop," I interrupted. "You can't comment on things like that." My sister was already Googling 2 pupils, 1 eye, so I peered over her shoulder. And that was when we first learned of polychoria. Lisa thought that it was cool, but I told her to keep that opinion to herself. The condition comes with difficulties such as visual impairment, which I was sure to point out to my younger sister. She took a moment to admire the mighty house in which we found ourselves in. I wouldn't exactly call myself an expert in architecture, but the lavish rhinestone home must have dated back to the late 19th century, given the long-faded Victorian decor. There were so many dusty, neglected paintings of our ancestors. The canvases hung on mahogany walls, which lined 2 staircases at either side of the entryway. It might not have been mahogany. It was something needlessly decadent. The lounge was visible through a large doorway on the right-hand side of the expensive lobby area. Standing in the doorway, my father spotted my sister and me. He beckoned for us to come and greet our great-aunt. "And here are your 2 grandnieces, Audrey," my dad said. As my sister and I entered the lounge, my great-aunt Audrey swiveled her head around to face us over the back of her armchair. It was only a courtesy, I suppose, given her blindness. Her glazed eyes surveyed Lisa and me. When she had used to visit us, I always believed that she was lying. I thought that she could actually see. "I assume you both have grown, but I wouldn't know," Audrey said, lightly giggling. I knelt on the rug in front of the log fire with Jacob, and my mom ushered Lisa into the kitchen. They helped the servants to prepare dinner. My little brother seemed contented that at long last his phone signal had returned. There certainly wasn't any Wi-Fi in that ancient house, so I warned him to not burn through all his mobile data or brain cells on terrible TikTok videos. When I mustered the energy to stand up, I saw Audrey whispering to my father. I couldn't catch all of it, but she seemed to be berating him for coming to the house. He told her that her 90th birthday was a special occasion, but she persisted with the scolding. I pretended to inspect the photographs on the mantel above the fireplace, so as to not arouse suspicion. "I told you to never come back to this place," she whispered. I heard that last line very clearly. "Aunt Audrey can tell you all about the people in these photos," my dad said, speaking at normal volume again. "Do you recognize any of them, Felicity?" I scoffed. "No, you've never told us anything about your side of the family." "Is that true, Lionel?" Audrey gasped. "Surely you've told them about your mother." "I told you about Maggie, Felicity," my dad said. "Yeah, you told me her name," I replied. "Your father's mother, my sister, was a remarkable woman," Audrey said. "I think you two would have liked her. She would have adored you. What happened in '89 was, well, your father and I were fortunate to survive." "Audrey," my dad began. "I think that we should talk about it," Audrey insisted. "There was a time that you thought I was the greatest aunt in the world, Lionel. You see, Felicity, I was the black sheep of the family. The Rhinestones were always such serious people, and I felt suffocated by them. Lionel's mother was the same, but she was always better at playing by the rules than me. She married, settled down, had children, and did everything by the book." Children. I knew my father had lost his parents in the mysterious incident of '89, but he had never mentioned any siblings. "Maggie was the only one who looked out for me, much as you look out for your brother and sister, Felicity," Audrey continued. "When I told my family what I had seen in the orchard, Maggie was the only one who had believed me." "A dinner," my mom interrupted, bursting into the room. My father guided Audrey into the dining area, casting a disparaging look at my brother and me as if to say that we should just let the topic drop. We entered a grand room with an obnoxiously long table. More mahogany, more paintings, more rot, cobwebs, and dingy lighting. And yet despite all of that, Audrey's ancestral home still had an air of sophistication and character. It was haunting, but it was also beautiful. "What is this?" Jacob asked. We had been served plates of indistinguishable meat with sides of vegetables. It almost looked like a roast dinner, but I shared Jacob's sentiment. I didn't like the look of the meat. "Jacob," my mom gasped. "I'm so sorry, Audrey." Audrey simply laughed. It's fine, Grace, I get it. Looks strange, doesn't it, Jacob? It's our slightly unique haggis recipe. You're in Scotland after all. Anyway, it's hard to find meat in these parts. The land, it isn't what it used to be. Breaking the uncomfortable stillness that followed Audrey's somber statement, servants emerged from the kitchen to collect our plates. My parents engaged in conversation with them, attempting to revitalize the atmosphere of the meal. I recognized one of the workers from our arrival, the woman with polychoria. However, something was different. Her iris had returned to normal. There was only one pupil in her left eye. But that wasn't what really stood out to me. Her face was warmer, kinder. Are you finished? She asked, reaching for my plate. Gazing at her, I nodded. The woman smiled at me with two blue eyes, each containing only one pupil. I'm Rosie. You're Felicity, right? Bowled over by the bubbly girl hovering to the side of my chair, I shook off the fear and confusion that she had previously instilled in me. Yeah, nice to meet you, I awkwardly replied. Sorry for not introducing myself earlier, Rosie said. You looked a little freaked out. I hope I wasn't giving you the resting face. I just had a bad headache, that's all. It's been a long first week. I hate this job. After that brief, one-way conversation, Rosie took my plate and left, as did the other servants. The rest of the evening slipped away from me. I couldn't stop thinking about the woman whose iris had changed in the space of a few hours. I couldn't stop thinking about the complete transformation in her overall aura. I don't know how else to describe the feeling in the pit of my stomach. All I know is that it filled me with unease. Rosie filled me with unease. As lovely as she seemed, I felt deeply disconcerted around her. Hey Felicity, Lisa whispered. Come and look out this window. Later in the evening, when we were exploring the house, Lisa and I ended up watching Audrey's orchard from a second-floor window. It must have been around 11 p.m. The overcast moon barely illuminated the acres of land behind the mansion, but we saw enough, more than enough. The grass was moving. Some black, featureless substance was seeping from the earth. It was slithering in long snake-like trails towards the house. What is that? Lisa whimpered. Before I could respond, there was a creak at the other end of the upstairs hallway. We both turned to see what had created the sound. Nothing. With quaking knees, my sister and I walked towards the other end of the corridor, clutching each other's whitened hands in terror. When we had reached the other end, we turned our heads to the right and looked down the staircase that led to the entryway. No light, no sound, nobody. Everyone other than us had gone to bed. I think we're jumping at shadows in the orchard and sounds in the house, I whispered to my little sister, attempting to soothe her. It's time for bed. Lisa nodded, wiping a tear that had started to form at the bottom of her eye. With a gentle nod of my head, I motioned at the bedroom door to the side of us. My sister entered the room and closed the door behind her. I turned around, ready to follow suit and get some much-needed rest. And that's when I saw her. At the opposite end of the hallway, standing before the window that overlooked the orchard, was a woman. In the unlit corridor, only dim moonlight revealed any of her features, but it was sufficient. Rosie. Even in the darkness of that upstairs hallway, I could tell that it wasn't the friendly Rosie that I had met in the dining room. It was the other Rosie that I had seen when we had first arrived at the house. Only half of her face was visible in the white glow of the moon, the left side. Her left iris, even at the other end of the corridor, noticeably contained two pupils. Felicity, Rosie whispered. Such a pretty name. Such pretty eyes. Rosie turned to face the window. She gazed upon the orchard, petrified. I was fixating on the shadowy specter with its back turned to me. And then, in a slow yet somehow instantaneous act, the unnerving woman raised her hands. She seized the two curtains on either side of the window. As her silhouetted fingers tightened their grip on the black fabric, I silently screamed, and I understood what she was doing. The curtains drew closed and we were standing in the darkness. She was at the window end of the corridor and I was at the staircase end. I wanted to run, but I couldn't see a thing. Moreover, I was paralyzed by fear. Silence. Then, the most horrifically loud wheezing. The pitter-pattering of delicate footsteps across the corridor. I didn't need to see anything to know that the thing, which looked like Rosie but wasn't her, had started to dart towards me in the blackness. Throat closing up, I stumbled against the wall and opened the first door on my left, the bathroom door. I frantically slammed it shut behind me just as something heavy barged into it from the other side. I twisted the lock and stepped backwards. I expected more banging, but the corridor was silent. The door was silent. All I could hear was my own heartbeat and the icy canals of my ears. Foolishly, I tried to convince myself that Rosie had gone. I told myself that it might be safe to open the door and go to my bedroom. I can see you. The words were whispered from the other side of the door, and they sent a tidal wave of goosebumps coursing across my flesh. Rosie was looking through the keyhole. I knew that before I even dared to look. Trembling, I reached for the light string and shakily tugged it. A murky orange glow was cast from the forgotten light bulb above me. I cautiously knelt on the tiled floor of the bathroom and shuffled over to the door. At first, looking through the keyhole, I couldn't see anything. Blackness. But then a chilling breath danced towards me, and an eye suddenly appeared at the other end of the keyhole, revealed by the light from the bathroom bulb. Two black, cavernous irises stared back at me from the single eyeball. I gasped in horror. I finally had a clear view of the two pupils in Rosie's left iris, and I was no longer sure that I was looking at pupils. They were moving, swirling around her eyeball like miniature eels. Black, living parasites. "Rosie," I whispered. "Please." "Rosie's gone. We need more bodies." The second pupil, which was writhing at the outer edge of Rosie's dazzlingly blue iris, suddenly divided. Before I knew it, there were three pupils fighting for space in her left eye. The newborn third pupil slid to the bottom of the iris. The black pupil, which wasn't really a pupil at all, exited into the sclera, which is the white part of the eyeball, and started to ooze into Rosie's lower eyelid. Once it had fully departed her eye, the watery black thing started to slither down the narrow tunnel of the keyhole. It was moving towards me. I backed away in slow motion, losing my grasp of reality and watching as the unidentifiable creature seeped through my end of the keyhole. It trickled down the wooden door, heading towards the bathroom tiles on the floor. I didn't know what to do. In a blind panic, I leapt into the bathtub, keeping my eye on the dark substance that was worming its way over the tiles. Once it had reached the center of the room, I inched towards the door, reaching for the handle. Leaning over the edge of the bathtub, I twisted the handle and flung the door open. She was gone. No such luck with the black parasite. Knowing that time was not on my side, I hurtled over the side of the tub, steered clear of the evil creature on the floor, and rapidly closed the bathroom door behind me. I pulled my jumper over my head and wedged it between the bottom of the door and the floor. Standing in the lightless hallway, I crouched down and stared through the keyhole into the still-lit bathroom. I had to stop the black thing from escaping. I tore off a corner of my t-shirt and plunged it aggressively into the keyhole, assuring that there was no gap through which the horrifying creature could free itself. I didn't know whether my barricades would be enough. I just knew that I didn't want to get anywhere near that thing. I had terrible visions of the black worm leapfrogging onto my face, wriggling its way into my eyeball and painfully taking over my mind. Zigzagging from wall to wall in the darkness, I found my way to the bedroom and locked myself inside. I didn't sleep, of course. I sat on the edge of my bed, keeping my phone connected to its charger, and continuously lighting the keyhole to my door. Those 8 hours were longer than you could possibly imagine. In the morning, feeling unwelcome in Audrey's home, my father begrudgingly herded us into the Range Rover. "I have no idea what's wrong with her," he said as we drove away. "I thought that we could spend a fun weekend together." "You just wanted to give her a nice birthday," my mom said, consoling him. "We tried." "Yeah, she used to be so easygoing," my dad said. "I guess time changes things." It was a quiet journey, and I was fine with that. At first, but something soon clicked. Jacob. We had passed so many red cars, but he hadn't uttered a word or even threatened me with a punch. I turned to face my little brother, and I immediately knew that something was wrong. He didn't look directly at me, but I know Jacob saw me in his peripheral vision. A twisted smile started to emerge from his face. I had to stifle a scream. My worst suspicion was confirmed. As if some aquatic creature were about to swim to the surface of his eye, I saw his pupil ripple. Look again at that dot. That's here, that's home, that's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you've ever heard of, every human being who ever was lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there, on a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. Carl Sagan. As they firmly strapped us in, I took a moment to relax and enjoy the final minute of Earth's gravity before takeoff. The rookie in the seat next to me looked worse for wear, with pearls of sweat covering his pale face. He had seemed so excited only moments before, but I couldn't blame him. The little blue planet had been his home, and now he would leave it, never to return again. "First time in space, right?" I chuckled, trying to keep the mood light. He nodded, his eyes still fixed at the control panel in front of us. "I'd like to tell you that the acceleration would knock you clean out, but that ain't the case. Lying in that position, blood is basically forced into your brain. You'll be awake to feel each bump on the road," I said cheerfully. That little tidbit of information seemed to break his trance. He looked over at me and cracked a weak smile. I could have given him words of comfort or told him that it wasn't that bad, but from my experience, I knew that fictitious humor would best aid our journey into space. "I'm not worried about the takeoff," he said. "It's just the magnitude of it all, you know." The countdown sequence had started, and I braced myself while the rookie desperately tried to control his breath. 10, 9, 8. "Time to say goodbye, kid," I yelled at him. 7, 6, 5. "Oh, don't listen to him," the pilot said. "You'll love it once we break out from Earth's atmosphere." 4, 3. Here we go, the rookie mumbled to himself. 2, 1. The shuttle shook violently, rocking us back and forth on our seats. The rookie kept his eyes firmly shut in anticipation, with his arms firmly clenched on the armrests. Before long, our spacecraft had taken off from the ground and started shooting up towards the vast sky above. It was a slow start as the engines worked their way towards maximum acceleration. It was an intense feeling of both horror and excitement, as our bodies tripled in weight, firmly locking us in our less than comfortable chairs. From takeoff to space itself, about 9 minutes would pass. Each one would feel like an eternity of its own, as the shuttle accelerated from a standstill to 17,500 miles per hour. "Observer, you have cleared the tower," Launch Control notified us over the radio. Appreciate the info. I didn't even realize we had started flying. The pilot joked as he looked over the control panel, making sure that none of the warning lights had greeted us with their flashing alarms. As far as the works on the ground were concerned, we were on a routine mission. According to any official document, we'd be staying a week in space before dropping back to Earth, landing gently in the massive deserts of Kazakhstan. In reality, our mission would take us much further away from home, and years would pass before any of us had ever had the pleasure of returning. What followed were 5 minutes of intense shaking. If I hadn't known better, I would have believed that we had been thrown into a dryer, as clothes rumbling around in circles. I wondered what kind of unexpected bruises I would find once we had finally reached the base. The rookie finally opened his eyes. I couldn't hold his nerves against him. He hadn't seen the best part of the journey yet. The magnificent view of Earth as we drifted away, weightless in space. "Observer, prepare for staging," launch control suggested through the radio. With that message, we were launched forward in our seats, noses pressed hard against the smooth glass of our helmets, almost touching the control panel inches ahead. A loud clunk sounded through the shuttle as these strap-ons finally detached from our ship, and the secondary boosters were activated. Minutes later, we had entered orbit, and the three of us finally relaxed while we awaited the third stage. Being free of Earth's harsh gravity was a strange sensation. As a larger man, it made me seem so insignificant, as if my mass meant nothing against the empty vacuum around our shuttle. It felt like falling, except there was nothing left in the universe to fall against. Total freedom. "Hey Daniel, check it out," the pilot said as he let go of the checklist in front of the rookie. There it hung, gently rotating in a weightless state, only seconds before the third stage would begin, officially starting our journey towards the moon. As we left our payloads behind, the escape tower was jettisoned out. For the first time, we had an unobstructed view of the infinite darkness ahead of us. Millions of stars greeted us with their full glory. Without the filter of Earth's atmosphere, we could see as far as space reached. There in the distance hung a white celestial body, seemingly small and insignificant. Unknown to the general public, it would be humanity's final hope. We were moving toward it at an almost impossible speed, yet it barely felt as if we were moving at all. "Beautiful, ain't it?" I asked. At least the rookie seemed less panicked. Without the literal weight of Earth's gravity to keep him pinned down, he could finally just sit back and enjoy the trip. "Wow, I don't even know what to say. It's the most amazing thing that I've ever seen," he said. He spent the next few hours just staring out at space, still not willing to believe that he had actually made it there. The rookie couldn't even have been out of his 20s, yet he had been specifically recruited for a lifelong mission on the moon itself. "Tell me, was it worth it?" I asked. "Was what worth it?" "Leaving everything you've ever known behind, to have the company fake your death and erase your presence from Earth, all so that you could spend the next decade in a secret base hidden away from mankind. I mean, you don't even know what the job is, do you?" He turned his attention towards me, finishing his staring contest with the universe. He pondered for a moment before finally responding. "All my life, I wanted to make a difference. To be one of the few to ever venture into space, to advance science. When the company contacted me, they didn't even tell me where I was going. They just said that I would be saving the world." He was smart, good physique, and socially intelligent. He could have had a fantastic life back on Earth, started a family, made a shit ton of money, and just enjoyed all of the luxuries that home had to offer. Yet he chose to help, knowing that he would never return. I knew then that he was someone I could trust. The trip towards the moon would take about 3 days, leaving us with plenty of time to get properly acquainted. I had been tasked with picking him up from Earth, and based on the file they gave me on him, he was nothing less than a genius. Sleeping in space was oddly comforting. There are no uncomfortable positions when floating without ups or downs. No limbs to lie on top of, and no need to roll around. Other than that, the trip to the base was fairly dull. The planet that we had left behind faded away into the distance, turning into a little pale dot. The base that we were heading towards had been named Ares. It was a massive construction on the dark side of the moon, out of view from the people back on Earth. Ares was the greatest creation of mankind, one kept hidden for decades, known to only the 200 people living there, and a handful of people situated back on Earth. When there, we had close to no radio contact with ground control. According to command, the less contact that we had with Earth, the less likely it was that our operations on the moon became public knowledge. As we were taken in by the moon's orbit, we started hearing static feedback. Before long, we would be in contact with Ares itself. "This is Observer 108 to base control. Do you copy?" the pilot asked. "Greetings, Observer. This is base control. We read you loud and clear. Station 7 is ready for docking. Get ready to initiate landing sequence." I pulled out another checklist while the pilot flicked around the necessary switches. Within a minute, we were approaching the docking station. The landing was smooth, and once the airlock had opened, we finally got the chance to stretch out our legs. We were immediately greeted by a decontamination crew and ordered to change out of our sweaty undergarments and into more suitable uniforms. "Hey, it's been a pleasure, Rick," the pilot said to me as we parted ways. It was time for the rookie's initiation into the system. I brought him to the sectional office, looking for his instructor and guide, Jennifer. "Rick, how are you doing?" Jennifer asked as she stepped out of the office. "I don't see you around Section 7 very often." "Oh, just bringing you our newest scientist. Mind if I stick around and make sure you don't go too hard on the kid?" She smiled and gestured for both of us to follow her through the narrow hallways of Section 7, as she explained protocols and rules around the compound. It was an impressive construct, a station big enough to comfortably house hundreds of people, in addition to the countless laboratories, workstations, and massive common areas for the large amounts of downtime. The fact that it had been hidden for so long was an almost impossible feat on its own, one that had piqued Daniel's interest. "Mind me asking, how and why has this been kept a secret for so long?" Jenna smirked. It was a question inevitably asked by every newcomer, one that she knew exactly how to answer. "You ever heard of the Manhattan Project?" she asked. "Yeah, the race to build an atom bomb back in 1939, Daniel responded confidently. 130,000 people working together to create the most destructive weapon in human history, divided into hundreds of sections, each working on their own part of a bomb to be dropped over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Out of these 130,000 people, only about a couple of dozen knew what the project would result in. The rest were kept in the dark, unknowingly causing the death of countless people." That's exactly how the Ares project was kept hidden, by giving each station a piece of the puzzle, just not enough to see the whole picture. I always loved listening to Jennifer's speeches about the Ares project. The look of surprise and amazement as they realized the magnitude of the situation. But one final piece of information still strayed away from Daniel's knowledge. "So what exactly are we doing here?" he finally asked. Before Jennifer got a chance to explain, the speaker system emitted a loud and jarring message. "Security Head Office calling Richard Fender. Report to Section 9 immediately." Jennifer and Daniel looked at me questioningly. "Sorry about that, I'll catch up with you later," I said as I started rushing down the hall. The act of running on the moon was a peculiar experience. With only 1/5 of Earth's gravity, you spend more time gliding through the air before each step hits the ground. In a way, it feels like flying, and you can reach speeds higher than what would be possible back home. On the other hand, without ground contact, it's hard to maneuver around corners, which is why Ares had been built almost exclusively with straight hallways. Within a few minutes, I had made my way to the head security office. Inside, I found a whole crowd of guards and officers all frantically trying to yell over each other to make a decision. "What's going on?" I asked. My supervisor, Lance Henderson, took me to the side to fill me in. "Rick, something landed next to Paw Station 12, he said. "It doesn't show up on any of our instruments, but the crew swear that they saw it." Particle Accelerator Weapon Station 12 was the furthest reach away from the main base, situated near one of the major craters. It was the last of a set of cannons aimed into deep space, weapons so powerful that they could deflect any meteor getting too close to Earth. "What are they saying about it?" "We don't know. We lost contact with them not 15 minutes ago. I need you to take a team out to the station and find out what the hell is going on." I made my way to the hangar, a massive structure situated partially underground, doubling as the main oxygen production facility. The moon's crust is naturally rich in oxygen, and by converting the rocks, we effectively produced and maintained an atmosphere within the station. 3 of my colleagues, Derek, John, and Patrick, met me by one of the buggies, all wielding rifles. It wasn't a large team, but with the few trained guards that we had at the station, the rest would stay behind. If something happened to us, the protocol was to lock down the entire Ares facility and abandon anybody trapped in the smaller stations. "Station 12, this is Buggy Zealot, do you copy?" John kept repeating as we endured the uncomfortable hour-long trip. It felt like an eternity had passed before we had made it to the station. It was a large construct with the particle weapon towering up from the ground, staring off into deep space. In front of the station lay a large diamond-shaped rock covered in what looked like massive blisters, some of which had ruptures. "What the hell is that thing?" John asked. "I don't know, but keep your weapons ready." There was still 2 buggies parked outside the station, meaning that the crew couldn't possibly have left. "Station 12, we are entering through the main airlock. Get ready for boarding," I said as we manually unlocked the front gate. We kept our helmets on even as the airlock was pressurized, and we could breathe. We didn't know what we could expect on the other side, so we had to be ready for a quick escape. We stopped dead in our tracks as we took our first steps inside. There on the floor lay the entire crew of Paw 12, dead and mutilated to various degree, with no sign of any other creatures. It didn't look like monsters had come in to murder the crew, but as if they had simply decided to kill each other, using whatever they could use as weapons. Some of their wounds were created with surgical precision, cut throat, stabbed heart, or a crushed skull, while others were more morbid, as if they had taken their time to finish the kill. The only discrepancy among the murdered was a man zip-tied to the wall in a corner, some distance away from the others. While his neck had been stabbed, it didn't look like any major vessels had been injured. As I bent down to examine the tied-up man, he suddenly jolted awake, screaming in horror. "No, stop it! Get out! I don't want to!" I grabbed him in an attempt at keeping him still, worried that he might make his injury worse. "Hey, calm down, you're safe," I kept repeating. His fear quickly turned to despair as he noticed the corpses littering the floor in front of him. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to," he cried. I grabbed a sedative out of my kit and injected him through his port, hoping that he would remain conscious, but at least calm him enough to relay what had happened on board the station. I read the name on his suit, Frederick. "Hey, Frederick, look at me. I need you to tell me what happened here." He calmed down a bit following the injection, and then he looked carefully around the room as if he was recounting the events that had transpired. "I tried to kill myself, I don't know why. I didn't want to, but the voices, oh God, the voices. They just kept telling me that I had to do it. They were so loud, so loud. My team, they pinned me down and tied me up, but it didn't help them. I'm so sorry," he sulked, still breaking down. I looked back at the dead crewmen littering the floor. If they had managed to tie him up before he had died, then who had killed them? What about the others? They just started killing each other, but it wasn't them. The things, they changed them. They made them do it. His rambles were only semi-coherent, but the last statement piqued my morbid curiosity. Who? The things. They came from the vessel. We didn't even see them, but they were there. They got inside our heads and they made us do it. I'm sorry, please, you gotta believe me. Oh God, oh God. He kept rambling for a couple of minutes. I gestured for Derek to put him to sleep. He would only make things worse by panicking. If we stood even the slightest chance of bringing him back safely to the station, he had to be put out. Hey, don't worry, Frederick. We'll get you out of here, I promise. Within a minute, he was out and we brought in a stretcher to carry him out. The rest of the crew were a lost cause, too destroyed to even fit into their suits. We had no choice but to leave them behind. We boarded our buggy and immediately got a transmission from the main bases. Buggy Zealot, do you copy? Yes, we made contact with Station 12. There are multiple casualties, but we're bringing back a survivor. Prepare the medical bay. Buggy Zealot, we've lost contact with Station 4, 6, 8, and 9. We are reading multiple heat signatures on the surface. Return to Ares immediately. Wait, what the hell is happening? There was a brief pause while I waited for the next transmission. Ares, are you there? And then they said words that I had dreaded the most since I was assigned to the project. A simple sentence that I thought was years away from ever coming true. They're here. We tied the injured crewman to our buggy, making sure that he didn't slip off as we sped back to base. What do you mean? How can they be here already? John asked over the radio. No response. Driving on the moon wasn't an easy task at high speeds. With the craters, it was a bumpy ride, and the ever-present dust increased the risk of sliding as we maneuvered towards the base. Buggy Zealot, we're initiating lockdown. Hangar 2 will remain open until you arrive, but we're putting you into quarantine. Understood, we'll be there in 10 minutes. I nervously scanned the horizon, looking for any sign of movement. Whatever creatures had been inside these pods, they had killed the entire crew aboard at Paw Station 12. We saw more of them on the way. Each of them were diamond-shaped, obsidian black containers made out of bizarrely shiny material. They were covered in blister-like sacs, mostly ruptured but some still intact, pulsating and twitching. They looked almost wet, but any liquid should have evaporated immediately as it hit the harsh vacuum of space. We parked the buggy outside the hangar and lifted Frederick into one of the service airlocks. On the inside, we were met with the blaring sound of an alarm and a set of isolation capsules for each of us. On the other side of the airlock stood my supervisor. We're gonna need you all to get inside the capsules while we decontaminate the room, he ordered nervously. Lance Henderson was an abnormally calm individual, even at the most stressful of times. So to see him on the brink of panic alerted me to the true gravity of the situation. Lance, is it true? Are they really here? He nodded somberly. Not a word more needed to be said. I knew then that the next couple of days would decide the fate not only for us but for the rest of humanity. After we put ourselves into the isolation capsules, they prepared to move us to the medical bay. Do we have any footage from the Paw stations? Lance shook his head. Most of it got corrupted after the pods appeared on the moon's surface. We're trying to restore it, but I'm not too helpful. I'll let you know as soon as we find anything, he said. I'll link up with you soon, just do as the medics tell you. The medics carried my security team and I to an isolated room. Frederick, who had sustained serious injuries to his neck, was put in a separate room next to us. It was a research facility, which meant that it had glass walls for observation. There was no privacy as we got undressed and changed into sterile clothing. You better tie him up, he's not himself, John said as the medics put Frederick in bed. By the time that we had been put into quarantine, the entirety of Ares had been put into complete lockdown. Anyone still outside the main base were on their own. Behind the glass walls, we could see crew members rush around in a panic, each trying to fulfill their duties at a record pace. All the while, the alarms kept blaring. Orders were shotted through the speaker systems, and we could do nothing but wait, uselessly stuck in isolation. Lance called me over the radio, briefing me on the situation. "Rick, we'll have your test results in an hour or so. In the meantime, we're trying to establish contact with anybody outside the main base. If they're still alive out there, we need to figure out a safe way to bring them inside." Has anybody responded? No, but we've detected multiple heat signatures on the surface. A few of them match the crew's transponders, but... He trailed off. But what? There are too many of them. We don't have that many people stationed on the moon. It's them, I said, my voice filled with premature defeat. Yeah, we've recovered some footage from Station 12. I'll send you the files. I turned to the computer mounted on the wall and typed in my credentials. A single video file had been uploaded to my profile, a few minutes of salvaged footage. I hit play and prepared myself for the worst. What greeted us was an overhead view of Station 12's interior, only an hour before we had entered. The crew relaxed in their leisure area, joking around and waiting for their shift to end. I immediately recognized Frederick standing in the corner, oddly quiet. He seemed to concentrate on something not visible on the camera. "Hey, you guys hear that?" he asked. The crew fell silent and all of them listened intently to their quiet surroundings. "Hear what?" "I don't know, it sounds like..." Without even finishing his sentence, Frederick grabbed a pen from a nearby table and started stabbing himself in the neck. Blood gushed out from the wound and the crew immediately rushed to pin him down. "What the hell are you doing? Stop that." "Let me go, I need to do this," Frederick yelled in protest. Get the damn zip ties." "Boss, there's something outside." "What are you talking about?" After tying Frederick to the wall, the crew gathered to stare out at the minuscule window, all of them in shock from what they saw. After a minute of disbelief, their boss grabbed the radio to alert Ares of the unidentified object. "Ares, this is Paul Station 12. We've found something on the moon's surface. I don't think it's of lunar origin." In response, only static could be heard. "Ah, shit, the radio's cutting out. Robbie, would you go check the connection?" Without responding, the crewman walked over to his boss and stabbed him with a screwdriver. One of the others lifted his weapon in a hopeless attempt at de-escalating the situation. "Drop the screwdriver," he ordered. But instead of helping, he turned his weapon on himself. Looking confused and without hesitation, he shot his own leg. The rest of the crew scattered in disarray, some trying to help their boss while others wanted to grab the gun from their coworker. The man with the screwdriver had already killed his boss and had turned his attention to himself. He proceeded to repeatedly stab his own abdomen, crying as he did. One by one, they all fell to the same insanity. Within only a few minutes, every single crew member had succumbed to their wounds, all save for Frederick, who had been tied to the wall just in time to save his life. The footage cut off abruptly and we all stood speechless in front of the empty screen. "What about the other stations?" John asked. "Do we really want to witness that again?" As we discussed the undeniable reality of an oncoming invasion, we started hearing groans coming from Frederick's room. He was waking up, luckily tied to the bed. "Where am I?" he asked. "You're safe, Frederick. The doc is on his way, just stay calm." "Oh God, they're all dead," he sobbed. "Oh, we should have given him some more sedatives," John said. "Where's the damn doctor?" Barry's head physician was a neuroscientist of advancing age. The rookie, Daniel, would be his new apprentice. By the time that the doc eventually retired, he would take over, specifically chosen for the job. They both arrived alongside Jennifer a few minutes later. We told them what had happened and he suited up to go inside to examine Frederick. Lance had finally returned after patrolling the area. He had locked down the entirety of our section and put guards on each airlock, should something try to break through. The staff was small, but each employee and guard or scientist had been trained to deal with situations like these. "Dr. Livingston, they briefed you on the patient?" Lance asked. "Oh yes, I'm well aware of the situation," he stated matter-of-factly. "Daniel, join me inside. We're gonna have to cut your training short. I've always thought that hands-on experience worked the best anyway." Together, they entered the isolated room, and Jennifer stood guard outside, ready to intervene should Frederick fall into psychosis once again. What followed was a barrage of uncomfortable but necessary questions. Frederick, who had attempted to kill himself only hours earlier, was undoubtedly shook from the experience, but whatever trance he had been in had long since passed. Halfway through the examination, another alarm sounded throughout the base. "Atmospheric breach in Section 9. All personnel must evacuate the area immediately." Lance immediately reached for his radio, demanding an explanation. "Section 9, this is Security Chief Henderson. What the hell is going on?" "Someone just blew up one of the airlocks," a voice screamed from the other side. "They took explosives from the factory." "Who?" "I don't know. We tracked a transponder from Paul Station 7. We tried contacting them over the radio, but he ignored us." "Is the breach sealed?" Lance asked. "Yeah, but half my team died in the vacuum. The rest of us are about to suit up in case the seal fails, but I don't know." He paused, and a loud hammering noise could be heard through the radio. "Oh my god, they're coming in through the seal. Everybody get the hell out of it." What followed was a vague crashing sound before the call got interrupted. "Damn it, I've got to go." "Jennifer, stay here and help the doc," Lance said. "Absolutely not, I'm coming with you. They'll need all the help that they can get," she argued. "And what about us?" I asked. "Sorry, Rick, you have to stay in isolation until the tests come back. Don't worry, they'll come and let you out ASAP." The two of them rushed down the long hallways towards Section 9 while we remained trapped with no chance to help. Daniel and Dr. Livingston finished examining Frederick and called for our test to be rushed through. 20 agonizing minutes passed as we waited for any updates on the situation. The occasional bang was the only thing keeping us company, as it echoed through the outer hall of Ares. Over the radio, I could hear requests for additional security coming from various sections around Ares. It was a call that nobody had the capacity to answer, and I felt utterly useless stuck in isolation. But then we heard the sound of multiple footsteps rushing down the hall. "Stay with me," Jennifer shouted. They rushed past us, carrying 2 stretchers. On one of them lay Lance, bleeding profusely from multiple gunshot wounds to his abdomen. "Jennifer, what happened?" I asked in shock. She ignored me, and they brought the injured crew into a separate room. Though we couldn't directly see them, we could hear the utter horror in their voices as they tried to stop the bleeding. It was a hopeless case, and from prior experience, I knew that Lance wouldn't make it. Only minutes later, he had bled out. Jennifer came over to our room, staring at me through the glass. Her eyes were red from a mixture of panic and despair. "Jen, is he dead? I killed him," she stuttered. "You did what?" He went crazy. We were investigating the broken seal, and even with the hull secured, something got through. Every single person who hadn't gotten out of Section 9 died instantly." "How many?" 37. Jesus Christ. She sobbed for a moment before continuing, her blood-covered hands visibly shaking from the ordeal. As we suited up, Lance said that he heard something. I had already gotten my helmet on, and I couldn't hear what he was talking about. But then he just... Another loud bang could be heard, followed by an alarm. Whatever things were killing our people, they were getting into the station. He shot the others point blank, and he would have killed me too. I didn't have a choice. I had to defend myself. I only wanted to stop him, but the first bullet didn't even faze him. I just kept pulling the trigger until he had dropped his weapon. I killed him. It was me. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. We didn't get a chance to continue the conversation before the medics came to let us out. Even without conclusive test results, we had been ordered to evacuate the area. The entire crew aboard Ares were pulling back into Section 5, the central and most secure hub of the station. "They're closing all the doors in 5 minutes, we've got to go now," one of them ordered. With no time to suit up, we started rushing towards Section 5, ready to fight whatever creatures had entered the station. "I just don't understand, they weren't supposed to be here for another 5 years. How is it possible?" Jennifer asked. "No idea, it doesn't make any sense." On our way, we passed numerous lockdown sections, all breached and their atmosphere replaced by an empty vacuum housing little more than dust and the corpses of our deceased crew. Multiple distress calls emitted from my radio, but we could do nothing to help any of them. All we could do was hope that as many people as possible made it into Section 5, where we had organized to fight against the invaders. "Rick, are you there? Please respond," a voice said over the radio. I recognized the voice. It belonged to one of these senior security guards, Brandon Clifford. "I'm here and we're en route to Section 5. Are you safe?" "Forget Section 5. We need you and the doctor to come to the main lab immediately." "The lab? Why?" He paused for a moment, letting out a half chuckle. "We got one of them." At trillions of dollars spent, Ares had been the most expensive project ever undertaken by mankind. It made the cost of the International Space Station seem like pocket change in comparison, but for its purpose it was worth it. Our goal had been simple: to save humanity from an inevitable invasion, one that we had foreseen since the early 70s, one that we had spent decades preparing for. Despite our best efforts, it only had taken the invaders a few hours to shut us down. In one fell swoop, they had shut down our entire paw defense grid, killed more than half our crew, and next on their list was Earth. Brandon Clifford had already gathered a team of doctors and engineers at the laboratories in Section 3, but with half the station occupied by a vacuum, getting there would be a challenging task. Rather than crawling through the separate ventilation system, we suited up and traversed directly through the locked-off sections. Weapons in hand and eyes peeled for enemies, we slowly made our way towards the lab, praying that the dead alien could provide us the answers we so desperately sought. "So they killed it, right?" Jennifer asked. "I mean, I sure hope so. I doubt we would have the means of interrogating it," I responded. Besides, it's time for payback. These things killed half our crew without as much as a second thought," John interjected. Once we had finally made it to Section 3, we were met with a set of heavy metal doors. They were strong enough to withstand the vacuum of space and able to negate the power of a nuclear blast. They had to be manually activated and could only be opened from the inside. "Brandon, are you in there?" I asked over the radio. "Rick?" "Yeah, it's me. I've got my security team with me. Would you please open up the damn door?" An airlock separated the lab from the rest of Section 3. It had been built in the early stages of Ares construction and functioned more as a minuscule station than a part of the main project. Luckily, it had been able to maintain an atmosphere despite the many breaches. It was a massive dome-like structure divided into several micro-labs. Each of them had been sealed off, hidden and distributed to different research teams operating in isolation from one another. At the very end was an autopsy room. It had been used to study the effects of low gravity on the decaying human body, but now it would be a place for alien dissection. Livingston and Daniel had arrived with a team of engineers, just in time to escape the breach in atmosphere. Whether they liked it or not, they were trapped in the laboratory with enough suits to bring everyone out. Brandon met us by the entrance. He had sustained a massive gash to his face, rupturing his left eye, and covered by a crude bandage. He guided us towards the autopsy room. In one of the corners, I noticed a pile of corpses. While I didn't personally know them, I recognized them as the lab's maintenance crew. What happened to them? I was escorting Dr. Livingston and his assistant over here, making sure that none of the invaders got them. As we got here, one of the crewmen complained about a loud noise. Before I got the chance to question him, he just pulled out a knife and slashed me across the face. I tried to get away, but he stabbed his coworkers and I had no choice but to shoot him. And the other two? I said as I gestured to their gouged out eyes and cut throats. They just dove in for the knife and started mutilating themselves. I couldn't stop them. He responded somberly. It wasn't until the adrenaline hit me before I noticed that creature standing in the hallway. I can't even explain it, just have a look at that thing. We entered the autopsy room. There on the table lay a massive creature. Though it had vague, humanoid features such as arms and legs, they were grossly disproportionate to what would function on Earth. Its skin was sickly pale white and covered in a mucus-like substance. The arms reached far beyond its own legs, which were split in half down the middle. Instead of eyes, ears, and mouths, the head was covered in deep, dark cavities. There were multiple bullet holes on its center mass, which I assumed to be the cause of death. But despite the high-caliber rifle used, there were no exit wounds. "Is it dead?" Jennifer asked nervously. "No idea," Livingston responded. "Its temperature hasn't changed and it doesn't appear to bleed. Our only comfort is that it doesn't show any kind of responsiveness." I looked back at Brandon, who tried to cope with his missing eye. "So what exactly happened to it?" I chimed in. "Well, the thing was wandering the hallway, covered in some weird slimy film. I didn't exactly stop to ask any questions, I just shot it. 2 mags to bring this thing down." I took another glance at the bullet holes. The injuries looked oddly clean and the bullets inside it seemed to vanish, as if the creature had simply digested them. "What do you think, Doc?" Brandon asked. He mumbled something to himself. "It's a remarkable creature. I have my theories, but I would need to open it up to be sure." "Well then what are you waiting for? Do it," Brandon firmly suggested. "Oh, don't be ridiculous. This is not something that you can just cut open with a scalpel. Its skin is too powerful. Besides, we're going to scan it first." The creature must have been 10 feet tall and weighed as much as all of us combined. Together, we pulled it onto a portable table and slowly pushed it towards the CT scanner. Once inside, Livingston didn't hesitate to start the machine. A loud whirring sound could be heard as the machine started taking pictures. "Oh, God damn it," Livingston exclaimed as the computer produced the scan. To the untrained eye, it just looked like a massive flare occupying most of the screen. "What is that?" I asked. "Starburst. It happens when there's a metal in the way of an X-ray," Daniel explained. "They put something inside this creature's head, and we're going to remove it." Livingston continued as he rushed off to gather some tools. He returned moments later with an ice pick and a hammer. Without a second thought, he started digging into the creature's skull. Though the skin was immensely thick, it didn't seem to contain any bones, and before long, he retrieved a small metal box. "What is it?" I asked. "I would need to take it apart to be sure," Livingston said as he walked over to a set of computers. "It looks oddly primitive though, maybe." Before he could finish the sentence, a high-pitched sound emitted from the speakers. We fell to the ground, clutching our ears in agony. Brandon, thinking on his feet, ran over to grab the device out of Livingston's hands. He threw it to the ground and started stomping on it. As the metal box shattered, the sound finally stopped. "You idiot, why did you do that?" Livingston asked furiously. "Why? Because it's so loud," Brandon shot back. Livingston collected the broken pieces and went to inspect the device. In the meantime, Daniel proceeded to repeat the ECT scan, this time without interruptions. We waited impatiently while the machine circled around the lifeless creature, slowly producing a picture that I didn't have the proper education to comprehend. "Wow, that's incredible," Daniel mumbled to himself as he looked over at the alien. Livingston joined him, and together they threw around a plethora of medical jargon that none of us could understand. After a few minutes of discussing the creature's anatomy, they started to look worried. They rushed to the radio and quickly disconnected it, before silencing every speaker in the room. "Turn your damn radios off," Livingston ordered. The lab was plunged into a deafening silence, and we all awaited a logical explanation from the doctors. "Sound. That's how they do it," Daniel said with a weird mixture of excitement and horror in his voice. "Sound? That's how they put people into a trance. They delude people into killing themselves and those around them, appearing as voices inside of their heads," he continued. Livingston kept studying the device, desperately trying to figure out its purpose. "It's a transducer," he suddenly said. "It converts sound to radio waves. That's probably how they communicate in the vacuum. It also means that they'll be able to hijack our own communication channels. You think they could use them against us?" He nodded. "These things, they're unlike anything found on Earth. They don't have a centralized nervous system, nor do they need a heart to pump blood through their bodies. If anything, they resemble insects more than mammals, except every vital organ seems to be diffused throughout their entire mass. That's why it's so hard to kill them. The only effective thing to fight back would be with fire." He paused, looking over at the creature once more. "We have to freeze it, make sure it doesn't wake up." We lumped the creature onto a table and started pushing it towards the freezer. It could bring things down to just a few Kelvin away from absolute zero, a temperature that could keep even atoms from moving around. "We need to warn the others," Jennifer said. "Send out a warning to Section 5, but keep it brief." As we attempted to push the creature into the freezer, I noticed that it twitched. Before I could even warn the others, Brandon froze in place. "No, no, no, no," he kept repeating. The alien moved again, not strong enough to get up, but clearly not dead. It's in my head. Get it out," he yelled as he lifted his gun to his own temple. I dove into him, trying to pin his arm down. In the process, he had accidentally fired off a round which had ricocheted off the ground and hit Livingston in the leg. As I tried to subdue Brandon, 2 of the other guards fell into insanity. With little hesitation, they grabbed whatever sharp object that they could find and started hacking away at their own bodies, quickly bleeding out. Brandon knocked me off, but the gun had slid too far away for either of us to reach it. Rather than fight him, I grabbed a nearby bottle of isopropyl alcohol and drenched the alien in it. Before anybody could stop me, I ignited the alcohol and set the monster ablaze. Despite being on fire, it didn't let go of the grip that it had on our crew. Brandon, alongside the engineers, rushed to embrace the burning creature, lighting themselves on fire in the process. The sprinkler system started spouting out a mesh of carbon dioxide dry ice, but with the burning crew lighting everything they touched on fire, it hardly helped. Despite our best efforts, the laboratory would soon be gone. In the meantime, Daniel had attempted to stop the bleeding from Livingston's leg, but it proved to be a futile effort. "It's his femoral artery. I can't stop it," Daniel said. By then, secondary measures had been activated to quell the fire. It meant that all of the oxygen would be sucked from the lab and expelled into the vacuum of space. Normally, it wouldn't be a problem, but with the entirety of Section 3 missing atmosphere, it meant that we needed to suit up. "We need to get to Section 5 immediately. Jennifer, did you manage to get a hold of them?" "They're not responding," she said in a panic. Not having time to come up with a better plan, I rushed to get suited up with the rest of the crew. We only had 2 minutes before the oxygen levels dropped to fatal levels. "Wait," Livingston called out. His face had turned pale from blood loss, and I could easily tell that he was only moments away from death. "You have to disable your radios. It's only a matter of time before they figure out how to intercept our channels. You have to, It meant that we would be walking out there with little to no situational awareness, unable to communicate with each other. Despite the horrific realization, we all knew that he was right. "What about you? We all know that I'm done for, just go." I glanced over at the burning remains of my former security team. John and Jennifer still attempted to put out the fire, but it was far too late. how are we supposed to stop them? You can't, Livingston said, his voice growing weaker with each word. But you have to warn Earth and give them a fighting chance. We suited up at a record pace and got ready to unlock the laboratory doors. The airlock would be sealed until the fire went out, which meant that we had to watch Livingston suffocate before we could even walk outside. Jennifer grabbed a paper-sized whiteboard, allowing us to communicate even without radio contact, but the thought of going out there deaf still terrified me. Don't let this be for nothing, Livingston gasped as the last bit of air got pumped out of the room. Seconds later, he fell silent onto the floor. It's time to go, I said to the remaining survivors as we unlocked the doors. Death had quickly become a fateful companion on our mission, but if we could warn Earth, it would be worth it. There are a lot of misconceptions when it comes to the agonizing death you would meet if faced with the vacuum of space. If an astronaut's suit should fail, exposing them to the vast emptiness around, how long would it take before they finally died? Would their blood boil over, or would they simply explode with nothing around them to withstand the body's internal pressure? Perhaps they might just freeze to death. Fortunately, those are not the case. The body can withstand a lot more than one might think. Liquids won't boil inside a closed system, nor can anything freeze quickly. Heat cannot easily escape our bodies without something to conduct towards. In reality, an astronaut's death in space is a horrifying but quick process. Once faced with the eternal darkness of space, there's no hope left of survival. There are only a few natural orifices on the human body. First, air is sucked out from your lungs no matter how hard you try to hold your breath. It's simply a futile task, and they collapse within a second. Then, whatever contents that have passed slowly through your digestive tract is forced out. After about 15 seconds of exposure, you lose consciousness, but not before feeling the saliva in your mouth boil over and the vessels in your eyes rupture. Then, with soiled pants and a fading mind, your body suffocates, and your body is destined to drift through space, unable to rot until the end of time. These were the thoughts that preoccupied my mind each time I put on my suit for any extravehicular activity. Only then the hostile territory wouldn't be space, nor the surface of the moon, but our own base. It had been plunged into vacuum as the monsters invaded, and we could only pray that anyone else had survived. During my regular spacewalk, we would have our communication channels to comfort each other. But with the invaders hijacking our radios to kill us, we had little choice but to wander in silence, nothing save for a small whiteboard to deliver simple messages. The four of us, rifles in hand, headed towards Section 5. It had been the main hub to organize an evacuation, but following the miserably failed autopsy of the first invader, we had lost contact. Fearing the worst, we could do little more than check up on them. Jennifer scribbled something down on the whiteboard and held it up in front of us. Shortcut this way. Being unable to respond, we had no choice but to follow Jennifer's orders. She brought us through a service airlock which hadn't been used since the construction of Ares, but at least would allow us to bypass most of the alien-riddled hallways. Once we got outside and onto the moon's surface, we were faced with dozens of new pods. Each had housed an invader, but they were nowhere in sight. We kept our eyes peeled as we sneaked towards Section 5's service entry. Our theory thus far had been that the invaders tracked us through radio signals, but whether they could still find us without remained an unanswered question. Guns ready, Jennifer wrote on the whiteboard as we got ready to walk inside. I held my breath in anticipation, deafened by the sound of my suit's fan. On the intermittent occasion that it stopped, I could feel and hear my own internal organs churning, the beats of my racing heart and the blood rushing through my arteries. As we opened the airlock, we expected a rapid flow of air escaping the middle compartment, yet we were faced with another vacuum. I felt my stomach drop as I was hit with the realization that Section 5 might have gone under. We raised our weapons, ready to face whatever monstrosities lay on the other side. The doors opened and what we were faced with didn't even resemble Ares at all. The entire section had been terraformed and the air had been replaced by an empty vacuum. The walls were covered in what looked like the charred remains of bluish flesh, and on the ground lay mangled body parts, seeming to belong to both our own crew and the aliens. I checked the room for an explanation and quickly found a massive hole in the section's hull. In a last-ditch attempt, somebody had blown up the section, hoping to kill as many invaders as possible, but there were no survivors. Despite their heroic efforts, there were still hundreds of invaders roaming the rest of Ares. Jennifer rushed to the central control panel, miraculously booting it up while the rest of us secured the area. Without a single word to warn our friends and coworkers, we got to work. Our first task would be to contact ground control and alert them to the oncoming threat of utter destruction. Our lives seemed painfully insignificant compared to the fate of Earth. Alas, the few satellites that we could use to contact home were either out of range or had been destroyed during the invasion. Without any means of communication, we would have to warn them ourselves, which meant evacuating the station. But before any attempted escape, we had to find any remaining survivors aboard Ares. I begged internally that somebody had escaped, but deep inside I knew that it was little more than a childish hope. We attempted to track any familiar heat signatures through the system. It was a slow process to filter out the numerous invaders, but we waited patiently hoping that they wouldn't find us. There were a few crew members in the section who had managed to get their suits on before the slaughter. Daniel went to each and diligently checked for signs of life, but just like the rest of the crew, they had perished in the explosion. Standing guard without aid of my own hearing was a horrible task. I periodically glanced back at Jennifer, checking to see if she had made progress with the computer. Despite not being able to see her face through the helmet, I could tell by her body language that the news wouldn't be good. She was quickly losing the last ounce of hope that she had left. After a painful few minutes, she held up the whiteboard. 154 invaders, she wrote. I stared at her in a mixture of shock and awe, not knowing what or how to respond. Instead, I just pointed at the many corpses littering the section, hoping that she would get the gist of my question. She cleaned the whiteboard and wrote a single digit back on it, 0. I shrugged, as to ask what our next plan would be. The factory, she wrote in response. The factory had been our weapons testing facility a few clicks away from the main base. At the time of the invasion, it hadn't been manned for weeks. It was simply a research station used on the rare occasion that we actually had to try out any new technology. Despite that fact, it had several escape vessels, but what Jennifer wanted with the station remained an unanswered question. At the very least, it might not have been taken over. The fact that no radio signals had been emitted from there in the absence of any crew meant the aliens could have let it be. But then Jennifer shot to her feet and frantically pointed at the computer screen. It seemed that our activity in Section 5 had attracted some unwanted attention from the invaders, and they were heading straight for us. We immediately started retreating back towards the airlock, hoping that we could get out before they saw us. But we were too late, and the monstrosities were too quick. 5 of them entered, just staring at us in confusion. They didn't seem to understand how we could resist their hypnotic sound and radio waves. Without hesitation, we opened fire on them, and slowly walked backwards toward the exit. Once the invaders realized that we could fight back, they charged at us with impressive speed. John just stood there before us, putting 3 rounds in one of them with absolute precision. It seemed to knock it out, if only temporarily, but he had stopped just long enough for one of them to grab him. "John!" I foolishly called out, forgetting that he couldn't hear me. But it was too late. No sooner had they touched him before he pointed the weapon at himself and pulled the trigger. The bullet ripped through his abdomen and blood spurted out through the hole, lingering temporarily in the vacuum before starting to boil. Regardless of the bullet itself, the vacuum would kill him in under a minute. We could do nothing but keep firing as we pulled back into the airlock. Unable to help him, we closed the airlock, giving him one final look of pity as his blood boiled in the harsh vacuum of space. Take a look outside your window and gaze upon the beauties the world beholds, the trees, the skies, the laughter of children. They walk around, ignorant of the fact that their world might end at any given moment. It could happen in less than a second while you sleep peacefully at night and you would never even realize it. Imagine yourself driving home from work. A brief flash fills the sky, an instant of surprise, and then nothing. The world ends, leaving no trace of life behind. That's how a gamma ray burst would appear, a vast source of energy created by colliding stars, millions of light years away. On the other hand, a false vacuum could extinguish all life in the universe just as easily, collapsing beneath the rules of physics, erasing everything humanity has ever been or ever could be, and we wouldn't be able to stop it. Solar flares, black holes, or even reversal of the magnetic poles. The universe is an endless, merciful, horrific void filled with uncertainty. Our place in it is absolutely insignificant. We are but parasites lingering in a hostile bubble, ready to burst at any given moment. Yet we never take a moment to appreciate our luck. Every breath might be your last, so make sure that it's worthwhile. Those were the words that raced through my mind as I watched John fall lifeless to the ground, dead by his own hands. They were words spoken by my old professor, a genius with a nihilistic personality, making sure that we all knew just how fragile life truly is. John had given his life for us, standing his ground as the aliens charged, yet they only needed a simple touch to end his existence. That image, the fear and surprise, had been locked in my mind forever. We ran through the airlock, sealing it on our way to make sure that nothing else could get through ever again. Once back on the moon's surface, we had to walk around Ares and travel 3 hours just to get to the factory. We couldn't even use a buggy, unless we wanted to get detected by its automatic tracking system. It had been 2 hours since we had started our EVAs, but with our modern tanks, we could easily last 8 hours before running out of oxygen, leaving us with an ample amount of time to get going. If we were lucky, the factory still had a functioning life support system despite having been offline for the past 2 years. We walked slowly, exhausted from the combat and subsequent escape. Despite gravity being only 1/6 compared to that of Earth, our suits made movement difficult, and in the process of fleeing, Jennifer had dropped the whiteboard, leaving us with no means of communication. Night had long since taken over the surface of the moon, plunging it into eternal darkness. The picturesque view most think astronauts have, with the Earth shining brilliantly in the background, was not one that we had the privilege of witnessing. Since Ares held the backside of the moon, we had little more than tiny stars filling up the sky, barely providing enough light to illuminate the dark, barren landscape before us. If nothing else, at least the darkness could provide us cover during our escape. 2 hours passed and we inched our way closer to the factory, our path barely lit up by our weak flashlights, purposefully set low to avoid detection. By then, we could just barely see the peak of the factory's observation tower, and we knew that we were getting close. As we took a break to admire the magnificently tall structure, we noticed something drifting across the sky, barely visible in the darkness of space. It was another drop pod. It shot down, creating a minor crater on impact. Like the others, it had an obsidian black capsule and multiple massive blisters, each seeming to contain an invader. I gave the others a final glance, reassuring them that we would hold our ground until the very end. With nowhere else to run, we didn't have any other options. The first blister burst and a slimy liquid tried to trickle down, boiling and evaporating before it could even hit the ground. One of the aliens crawled out and got to its feet. Without hesitation, we opened fire, putting multiple rounds into both its head and torso. After about 15 shots, we finally brought it down. Before we could react, the remaining 5 blisters ruptured and more monstrosities crawled out. That time, we didn't even wait for the liquid to clear before we started firing upon them. On Earth, the spectacle would have been loud enough to rupture eardrums and alert the enemy from miles away. Yet on the moon, murder was a silent process. Any sound originating within the chambers of our rifles was quickly quelled as it met the empty vacuum outside. The only thing that we could hear were the vibrations propagating through our own bodies, shaking violently with each pull of the trigger. With limited ammunition, it wasn't long before we ran out. 2 aliens, both riddled with bullets, kept charging at us. I hit one with the butt of my rifle and shoved it to the ground. I kept hitting it where it lay, not stopping for a second until it resembled a little more than a pile of minced meat. The second one that managed to prevail through the hail of bullets charged at Daniel. He grabbed onto his torso with its massive arms. Within a second, Daniel had fallen victim to their control and pointed his weapon at himself before pulling the trigger. Nothing happened. His gun was empty. Once the first option had failed, Daniel attempted to rip his spacesuit apart, an impossible task, luckily unknown to the alien. Both Jennifer and I ran at the creature and pummeled it to the ground, smashing its horrific body with our empty rifles, not stopping until it died. Daniel had been freed, but in the process he fell unconscious. We quickly investigated his limp body for any injuries or holes in the suit, but apart from his untimely slumber, he appeared fine. We looked at each other, realizing that we would have to carry him the rest of the way. I had never been so thankful for low gravity. The rest of the factory came into view shortly after, an impressive structure full of empty hallways and failed experiments, most classified above my own clearance. It had been abandoned after the development of the pulse stations. They were the best our technology had to offer, and yet they had been eliminated within the first hour of the invasion. Our failsafe and humanity's last hope against an inevitable end had been destroyed. We entered through an airlock as I carried Daniel on my back. What lay ahead of us was a massive network of hallways expertly organized to keep anything confidential out of sight. In absence of a maintenance crew, the station had fallen dark with only a minimal amount of emergency lights to guide our way. Unfortunately, lead life support had been turned off in our absence, meaning that we had to rely on the constantly diminishing oxygen supplies still within our suits. The factory, like Ares, had effectively lost its atmosphere. Of course, there were tanks of oxygen spread across the station by each airlock, but we would still be confined to our suits while we worked. Both Jennifer and I had been stationed there during our tenure aboard Ares. However, I suspected she knew more about the station than I did, as she guided us through the long hallways without an ounce of doubt. After several twists and turns, we ended up in a massive control area. It was dark and every system had been deactivated to preserve power. Jennifer searched the room and quickly found a notepad and a pen. She grabbed them and jotted down a single word: Faraday. And then she clicked her radio on and I put Daniel down onto one of the chairs, making sure that he still had enough oxygen available. With mild trepidation, I turned my own radio on, and for the first time since we left the laboratories back at Section 3, we could talk to each other. Each major station here is built with a Faraday cage. Nothing can get in or out without being connected to the mainframe. We should be fine as long as we're just using our suit's radio systems, Jennifer said. Alright, so you mind telling me what we're actually doing here? Shouldn't we be getting off the moon to warn Earth? I asked. I don't know if we can. How come? Well, according to the records back at Section 5, 2 shuttles attempted to evacuate, but none even made it off the surface. These creatures must be tracking our systems. I figured we might stand a better chance here, but still. Do we have any chance at all? She sighed. Maybe, but there's something that we have to do first. What do you mean? Did they ever tell you about a project called The Last Resort? I immediately knew what the project entailed. It was something that I had read about during my initiation, but back then it had been little more than rumors and whispers. just a theory that none of us ever believed would come to fruition. As I processed the shock, Daniel started to wake up. He quickly noticed us talking and turned on his own radio. "Oh, so we're talking now. Are we safe?" I shook my head. "Not yet, but they can't hear us here." "Well, that's a relief. I was about to go crazy." Jennifer interrupted. "None of that matters anymore. It's time." "Time for what?" Daniel asked. "We're going to blow up Ares." There will come a time when the last word is spoken by the last human left alive, a moment heard by none to be forgotten by time itself. There will come a time where love dies and the last heart stops beating. One final embrace before death takes us apart, and one last kiss to say goodbye. Humanity, for all of its worth, will perish like so many other species before us. We will fight it tooth and nail, but no matter the case, our time will eventually come. There will come a time where all hope seems lost, but we will not give up because our lives and the lives of those that we love are worth fighting for. As we prepared for our last mission, I recounted the events of the past day. Something about the situation didn't sit right with me. We had been monitoring the oncoming invasion for the past 50 years, yet we had completely missed its imminent arrival. It doesn't make any sense. I whispered to myself, forgetting everything would be broadcasted to the others. "What doesn't?" Jennifer asked. "Their numbers." We counted about 150 signatures aboard Ares, a weirdly small force that arrived 5 years ahead of schedule. How do you explain that? The ship that we detected back in the 1970s was the size of the entire United States. But it's not here. "What are you saying?" Daniel chimed in. "What if this is only a scout party? What if the main invasion is still 5 years away? If they're all confined within Ares and we blow it up, it should give us enough time to make it to Earth and warn them." My words, though meant to comfort, hardly brightened the mood. If a scout party took out the best that we had to fight them, I'm afraid that we're utterly screwed, Jennifer responded. "At least we know how they operate. If anything, I'd say that's the best advantage that we possibly could have gotten. We need to make it back to Earth," I said. It was a simple enough plan in theory, but even if we had managed to blow up Ares, it wouldn't ensure that every single alien died in the blast. "So, the last resort, what is it?" Daniel asked. "You know how Nikola Tesla worked on the wireless transfer of electricity," Jennifer said. Daniel nodded. "Well, it's like that, except it's weaponized. It was supposed to be a device that irreversibly damaged electrical systems by overcharging them. Harmless to people, but it could render an enemy station useless. Unfortunately, it had the side effect of blowing everything to pieces. So we repurposed it as a measure of last resort should anything take over Ares. Better than killing everybody with nukes, I suppose. Don't worry, we have those too. But let's not kill ourselves while we still stand a chance," I shot back. In the end, we knew at least that one of us had to escape to get a warning out to Earth. If we could kill any of these things in the process, then that was just a bonus. Before we could fire the weapon, we would need to restore the factory's power. Jennifer would take the task and head for the basement. Once there, she could redirect any power from the neighboring stations and funnel it into the last resort. In the meantime, Daniel and I would climb the observation tower, from where the last resort could be controlled. Once activated and Ares had been destroyed, we would retreat to the main hangar and pray that any of the escape shuttles still remained functional. "Hey, screw it. Let's not die today," Daniel said. "Once we leave this room, we cannot communicate anymore. Should they hijack our channels, we're done for. We need to maintain total radio silence for the next few hours no matter what happens," I ordered. They nodded and quickly turned off the radios. It was time to re-enter the silent vacuum outside. No sooner had I turned my radio off before I regretted not speaking any words of comfort. For all I knew, these could have been our last words ever spoken. We left the control room equipped with little more than some paper and pens. Jennifer instantly ran to the lower levels while Daniel and I headed for the elevator that led up towards the observation tower. With the power mostly out, the elevator didn't run, which meant that we had to move up the ladder within the shaft itself. It was an exhausting climb despite the lower gravity. We made slow progress, but determined to save ourselves on Earth, we eventually got there. Daniel gave me a look, not knowing what to do. His face was wet from sweat, both from nervousness and exhaustion. I gave him a set of basic instructions, just which switches should be on and which off. He diligently followed orders while I started to reprogram the weapon. While its basic functions were active, we had to wait for Jennifer to turn the power back on before we could initiate the firing sequence. Half an hour quickly passed and I started to get nervous. Another 10 minutes and I was about ready to go looking for her. As I jotted down an explanation to Daniel, I noticed that one of the lights turned on, alerting us that the power had returned. Without hesitation, we started the firing sequence and counted down the seconds until activation. Even from the observation tower, we could just barely see the peak of Ares, a place where hundreds of great lives and trillions of unimportant dollars had been lost. It had all been for nothing. And then the weapon finally charged. "Ready?" I wrote down on a piece of paper. He nodded and we fired the weapon. For a moment, I feared that Ares was too rid of oxygen to ignite the blast, but these doubts were quickly stifled as a massive explosion emerged over the horizon. Tons of debris shot up from the moon's surface, powerful enough to escape orbit. A few seconds later, the ground beneath us rumbled. Shock waves couldn't travel through a vacuum, but the explosion itself had been enough to shake the ground. Holy shit. I could see Daniel mouth silently. I attempted to scan Ares for any identifiable heat signatures and radio signals, but in the wake of the explosion, I could only get a static-like image that proved impossible to read. There was no way to know how many aliens survived the explosion, but I knew that whatever was left, they would head straight for us. We evacuated the tower. Luckily, the elevator had been activated alongside the rest of the station, meaning that we didn't have to climb down. It was a minor victory, but it came with the downside of a re-establishing atmosphere. With the power returned, we knew it was only a moment of time before the generators down in the basement produced an effective atmosphere. Soon, we would be able to breathe and hear. By all measurable metrics, time was running out. The hangar in the factory was filled with experimental vehicles, most only used for local travel and none helpful in our escape. Despite that, the factory was equipped with several escape shuttles, 2 of which were still docked. Back on Earth, common fuel only has a shelf life of about 3 to 6 months. Kerosene fuel, on the other hand, can last years without degrading, and the factory had plenty of it. Once we got down there, I started the fueling process. Still, Jennifer was nowhere in sight. Once the process of refueling had started, I took to a control panel and scanned for any signs of life in the vicinity. In the distance, only a mile away, I could see dozens of creatures approaching us. "Shit," I shouted, the words only echoing within my own suit. We still needed an hour to fuel, and based on the invaders' speed, they would be here just shy of that. The hours slowly ticked down, and by each passing minute, our deaths approached. I couldn't risk waiting any longer, so I signaled for Daniel to stay put, while I went to look for Jennifer. Based on her signature, I tracked her to the basement of the factory, running around erratically. I rushed through the dimly lit halls, slowly starting to hear the echo of my own footsteps. By then, the atmosphere was almost fully restored. The basement was a massive room filled with generators converting moon dust to breathable oxygen. Jennifer was moving from generator to generator, deactivating them in an attempt at stopping air from being produced. She wasn't even wearing a helmet anymore. I approached her, noticing that each pillar next to the generators had been mounted with explosive charges. "We need to stop them," she shouted as she noticed my presence. I took my own helmet off, letting in a breath of stale air. "We're about to leave, come on." "It's too late, they're almost here. We need to bring this station down with us." I glanced at the charges, noticing a timer slowly ticking down. Within the next half hour, the station would blow, and unless we could escape, we would be disintegrated with it. How did you even find these? I used to work here, remember? Now put your helmet back on. I'm about to evacuate the air from this place. With that, the atmosphere had once again vanished, and we were plunged into everlasting silence. We left the basement and rushed back to the shuttle, which was still 10 minutes away from being ready. As I prepared the craft, the others stood in uncomfortable silence. We all knew that the station could be run over at any moment, yet we had no weapons nor numbers to fight back with. I glanced over at the control panel, the blips on the radar growing ever closer. And then we felt it. The station shaking as the first set of doors blew open, and we were still not ready to leave. We looked at each other, doubt and fear on all of our faces, and then another shake as a second set of doors were breached. They were getting closer. In less than 5 minutes, they would be upon us. How long? Jennifer jotted down on the paper. I held up my hand, showing that we still needed 5 more minutes before we could launch. I looked at the door, wondering when it would blow open and the monstrosities would barge in to end us. I knew what had to be done. Someone had to lead them away from the hangar and trick them into another part of the station. As I turned around, I saw Daniel inside the shuttle, detaching a portable radio from the dashboard. He had made the same realization as myself and was going to sacrifice himself. I tried taking it from him, but he pushed me away and he rushed for the doors. Before they closed, I could see him flick the radio on, creating a mess of radio signals that would attract the aliens. Since it wasn't the one built into his suit, they wouldn't be able to control him. He started running in the opposite direction of the hangar and the aliens followed diligently. Jennifer and I boarded the shuttle hesitantly and immediately got it running. She pointed back in the direction that Daniel had to run, but it was pointless. He had given us an opportunity, and if we didn't take it, we would perish alongside him. We shot through the evacuation tunnel, garnering enough speed to easily escape the moon's weak and unstable gravity. Even then, we couldn't speak until the oxygen levels rose within the shuttle. All we could do was stare out the window and wait for the charges to detonate. There couldn't be much of a blast to speak of without oxygen to carry the fire. The station simply collapsed as the beams evaporated, killing anything still within. Daniel had saved our lives and taken down what remained of the scout party in the process. Once at a safe distance, we finally removed our helmets but kept the radio off. "We made it," Jennifer said with a somber tone of voice. It was a bittersweet victory, and I let out a sigh of both sadness and relief. We had failed to protect Earth, and Ares had been taken out by a simple scout party. It was only thanks to the heroism of our fallen friends that we were given a chance to warn Earth. We survived the first wave, but as previously suspected, a much larger force will reach us in the next 5 years. With current technologies and the multiple wars we fight among ourselves back on Earth, we don't stand a chance. This will be our last stand, and the only hope of victory that we have is to stand together as one.